you stand on the damp wooden dock of a small Norse trading settlement, the morning air cool and still. The sky is a smooth layer of low grey cloud that hides the sun and softens all edges, and the harbour around you rests in a quiet so complete that even the water seems to hold its breath. The dock itself is made of old timbers, dark with moisture and worn smooth by countless feet, and it creaks gently under your weight in a slow rhythm that matches the slight movement of the sea beneath. A knarr, a sturdy cargo ship with a high curved prow and stern, floats beside the dock. Its tarred planks are nearly black with the damp, and small beads of water cling to the wood without falling. The ship rises and falls with an almost imperceptible motion, tugging lightly at its mooring lines, which are thick ropes made of twisted hemp, their fibers frayed just a little where they rub against the dock's iron rings. You take a moment to look around, letting your eyes wander across the harbour that is just beginning to stir. To your left, a few other vessels, smaller fishing boats, sit hauled up on the rocky shore above the tide line, their hulls turned upside down and covered with draped nets that hang in loose folds. The nets smell of salt and old seaweed, a scent that mingles with the sharper odour of tar from a nearby shed where a man is slowly stirring a black pot over a low fire. The smoke rises in a thin, lazy column that bends slightly before disappearing into the grey sky. A gull stands on a piling not far from you, its feathers ruffled by a breeze you cannot feel, and it tucks its beak under a wing before going still. The only sounds are the gentle lapping of water against the wooden pilings, the occasional soft cry of another gull far off, and the faint clink of metal from the smithy up the slope, a sound that carries like a distant memory. The settlement behind you is a cluster of low wooden buildings with sod roofs, the grass on them still brown from the winter just past. A thin wisp of smoke rises from the smoke hole of the nearest longhouse, and you can smell the faint comforting scent of peat burning, a smell that is earthy and warm. The path from the buildings to the dock is muddy but not deep, marked with the prints of boots and the narrow tracks of a small cart that must have carried goods down to the water earlier. You see a few people moving with the slow pace of early morning, a woman carrying a wooden bucket toward a stream, a man rolling a barrel down the slope with careful, deliberate pushes, pausing every few turns to steady it. There is no hurry in any of their movements, and the whole scene feels like a painting that changes only when you look away. Your own boots are made of soft leather and lined with wool, and they make a quiet, solid sound on the planks as you take a step closer to the ship. The knarr is larger than the fishing boats, its hull broad and deep to carry cargo across open water. The prow curves up into a simple carved figure that is not a dragon or a beast, but a smooth spiral, worn by years of salt spray until the details are almost gone. The stern mirrors that curve, and between them the deck is open except for a small raised platform at each end and a single mast, thick as a small tree, stepped in a socket near the middle. The mast is already in place, and you notice how it tapers gently from base to top, the wood pale where it was shaped by adze and polished by handling. The rigging hangs in loose, orderly coils from the yard, which is lowered and resting on two wooden supports. The lines are tarred hemp, and they cast faint shadows on the deck in the diffuse light. A crewman steps past you, a man with a calm face and hands darkened by pitch, and he nods once without speaking before stepping aboard with the ease of long practice. He does not rock the ship. His weight settles into the hull as if the vessel welcomes him. You watch him move forward to check a lashing on the cargo, and then you follow, placing one hand on the gunwale to steady yourself. The wood is cool and slightly rough under your palm, its surface marked by tiny checks and splits that run with the grain. You lift your foot over the side and feel the deck receive you, solid and stable even though you know the water is deep beneath. The ship carries the smell of tar, salt, and something else. The faint, clean scent of wool that has been stored with dried lavender or perhaps simply aired on a windy hill. It mixes with the sea air and becomes part of the atmosphere you will breathe for the next many days. On board, the activity continues without any sense of urgency. Two men are stowing bundles wrapped in coarse cloth, each bundle tied with a simple knot that can be undone quickly if needed. The bundles are stacked amidships just forward of the mast, and you can see that some contain dried fish. By the way, a few fine scales cling to the cloth, shimmering faintly in the muted light. Others might hold fleeces or bolts of woolen cloth, because they are soft and give slightly when the men press them into place. Small barrels are being lowered over the side, one at a time, using a rope sling that squeaks just a little with each turn around a wooden cleat. The barrels are made of oak, their staves held by dark iron hoops, and they land on the deck with a dull thud that vibrates through your feet for a second before fading. A young sailor, his beard barely more than a shadow, carries an armload of coiled ropes and sets them down near the stern, arranging each coil so that it lies flat and ready, the loops perfectly round like a snail's shell. You find a place near the stern, where a sea chest turned on its side serves as a seat for the helmsman, and you sit down slowly, feeling the texture of the wood through your woolen trousers. The sea chest itself is locked with a simple iron hasp, and its surface is carved with a pattern of interlocking lines that you trace with a fingertip without thinking. The tiller, a long oar fixed to the starboard side, extends forward within easy reach, its grip polished to a dark shine by many voyages. You rest your hand on it and feel not a vibration but a kind of stillness, a potential that waits for the open water. Around you, the crew continues their work. The man who nodded at you is now checking the sail, which is furled tightly to the yard. The heavy wool fabric bound with strips of leather at intervals so that it stays compact. The stripes in the sail are muted reds and browns on a natural cream ground, and they run vertically, slightly uneven, showing where the loom's shuttle changed direction. The sailcloth is thick and would be heavy if you tried to lift it, but now it rests like a sleeping animal, full of latent purpose. You hear the sound of a bucket being lowered over the side and then pulled up, water streaming from its bottom as it comes aboard. The man who drew it, the same with the dark hands, pours the water into a small wooden cask that is lashed near the mast, and you watch the glint of the liquid as it arcs from the bucket to the cask's opening, catching what little light there is before disappearing into the dark interior. The cask lid is then tapped into place with a wooden mallet, two soft knocks that echo once off the water and are swallowed by the clouded sky. Another crewman, an older man with grey streaking his hair, is sitting on a coil of rope and mending a net, his needle a polished bone that moves in and out of the meshes with a rhythm as steady as breathing, as steady as breathing. He does not look up. His attention is entirely on the work, and his lips move slightly as if he is counting stitches under his breath. The light in the harbour is unchanging, a diffuse grey that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, so that shadows are soft and barely visible. The clouds are the colour of unwashed wool, and they stretch to the horizon without a single break, a continuous ceiling that presses down with a gentle weight. The water inside the harbour is dark, almost opaque, and it reflects the clouds as a slightly lighter version of themselves, broken by the slow ripples that spread from the ship's hull whenever a swell nudges it. You can see small specks of debris on the surface, bits of wood, and once a single drifting feather that spins slowly in an eddy before moving on. The air temperature is such that you do not feel warm or cold. It is as if the atmosphere has reached a perfect balance with your skin, leaving you with only a sense of presence without discomfort. Time moves in a slow, liquid way as you sit there. You might have closed your eyes for a moment and opened them again to find that nothing had changed except that the man with the net had shifted his weight slightly, or that the barrel that was being lowered before is now stowed, and a new one is being lifted over the side. The gull on the piling has not moved, but its head is now up, and it is staring blankly at the water, with the same patience that governs everything else this morning. You notice a smell of fresh bread from somewhere, perhaps from the longhouse where someone has opened the door, and it rides on the air for a few breaths before fading, replaced by the ever-present salt and tar. A dog barks once, far up the slope, and the sound does not echo but dies quickly, absorbed by the sod walls and the heavy sky. One of the crew now speaks, his voice low and unhurried, asking if the water cask is full, and the man with the bucket nods and says that it is. The two syllables drifting across the deck like a few notes of a simple song. The skipper, you assume, A man with a calm bearing and a close-trimmed beard comes aboard last, stepping from the dock with a leather bag slung over his shoulder. He does not give orders, but simply looks around, checking each lashing with a touch of his hand, pausing at the tiller to lay his palm on it as if greeting an old friend. His tunic is dark blue wool, the edges bound with a narrow band of tablet-woven trim in faded yellow, and his belt is wide leather with a simple iron buckle. He carries no weapon, only a small knife at his belt that is more tool than threat, its handle smooth from use. He nods to you, not in recognition but in a general acknowledgement of all things being in order, and then he sits on a chest near the mast, pulling a small tally stick from his pouch and studying the notches carved into its surface. You watch him run his thumb over the notches, his lips moving as he counts silently, and then he tucks the stick away and looks out at the harbour mouth where the water darkens into the deeper sea. There is nothing in his expression that suggests worry or hurry. He is simply observing, taking in the same grey water and grey sky that you have been watching, and you feel that his presence completes the ship in some quiet way. The crew, now 6 men including you if you count yourself, have all settled into their positions without any formal signal. They simply stop moving, each finding a place to sit or lean, and the ship becomes still except for the gentle rocking that never ceases. The sail remains furled, the oars are still drawn in, and the mooring lines are still fast to the dock, but you sense that the moment of departure is approaching with the same inevitability as the tide turning. You look back at the settlement and see that the woman with the bucket has reached the stream and is kneeling on the bank, her reflection a soft blur on the water. The man with the barrel has stopped rolling it and is now talking to another person who has come out of a dwelling, their voices carrying as a low murmur without distinct words. A small child appears at the door of the longhouse, stands for a moment watching the ship, and then goes back inside without making a sound. The dock, the buildings, the whole settlement looks as if it is already fading into the grey light, becoming part of the past, even while you are still there. A seabird, not a gull, but something smaller with a forked tail, lands on the yard for a moment, tests the wood with its feet, and then flies off again, its wings making a soft whistling sound. You notice that the tide has risen just a little. The water now laps higher on the pilings, and the ship's motion has become slightly more pronounced, a slow, rolling lift that travels from bow to stern like a deep breath. The skipper rises, tucks his tally stick back into his pouch, and walks to the stern where you are sitting. He does not speak, but points with his chin toward the bow, a silent question of whether you are ready, and you nod, although it does not really matter if you are ready or not. The ship will go when the time is right, and you are simply part of its rhythm. The only things left to bring aboard are a few personal items, a small leather satchel that the grey-haired man places under his rowing bench, a wooden box with a sliding lid that contains some carpenter's tools, which the young sailor stows near the stern, and a clay pot of salted butter wrapped in a net, which is hung from a peg so that it will swing freely with the ship's motion. These small additions are all made with the same slow care, and then the dock is bare of anything that belongs to the ship, the ropes being the last connection. The man who was stirring tar has put out the fire, the smoke stops, and the scent lingers a moment longer before being washed clean by the salt breeze that is just beginning to stir across the harbour. That breeze is the first real movement of air you have felt all morning, and it touches your cheek with a cool, damp finger before passing on. You shift your weight on the sea chest, feeling the coarse wool of your cloak under your thighs, and pull the hood a little further forward so that it shields your neck. The cloak is dark brown, its weave dense enough to keep out the damp, and it smells of lanolin and the smoke from 100 fires. It is heavy but comfortable, a familiar weight that you have worn so often, it feels like a second skin. Your tunic underneath is a lighter wool, undyed, with long sleeves that you have pushed up just enough to free your hands. Your hands themselves are strong and capable, the nails short and clean, and they rest on the tiller with the ease of long acquaintance. The skipper finally speaks in a voice that carries just enough to be heard by all, a single word that means cast off. The sound of it is not a command, but an observation, as if he is noting that the time has come. The two men nearest the dock begin to untie the mooring lines, their fingers working the knots that have been in place all night and that come loose with a few deft movements. The ropes slide through the iron rings with a soft hiss and are pulled aboard, where they are coiled and set down without haste. The ship, now free, drifts away from the dock by the width of a hand, then another, and you feel a subtle change in its motion, a new freedom that comes from being untethered. The gap between the dark hull and the wet wood of the dock widens slowly, revealing water that is murky and still, and then the current takes hold and turns the ship slightly, pointing its prow toward the harbour mouth. Oars are run out through the ports along the sides, their shafts sliding through the round openings with a gentle scraping sound, and the blades dip into the water with a quiet splash that is more like a kiss than a noise. The rowers seated on their sea chests begin a slow stroke that is not synchronized to a beat, but to their own breathing, each man pulling with a steady, even pressure that sends the ship forward at a walking pace. You feel the vibration of the oars transmitted through the hull to your seat, a low, rhythmic thrum that is as soothing as a heartbeat. The tiller, still in your hand, comes alive with a gentle pressure, and you make a tiny adjustment to keep the ship heading straight down the channel, the motion so slight that it is more a thought than an action. The settlement recedes behind you, the details blurring first. You can no longer see the woman by the stream, nor the child at the door, and the tar smoke shed becomes just another dark shape. The whole shoreline takes on a uniform quality of grey and green, the rocks and the moss and the few stunted trees merging into a single band that separates the water from the cloud. The fjord walls rise gently on either side, bare rock polished by ancient ice, their surfaces streaked with darker lines where water seeps down from the heights and feeds small patches of bright moss. You can hear the sound of the oars creaking in their locks, each creak slightly different depending on the wood and the age of the leather lining, and you listen to this quiet music as if it were a lullaby that has been sung for 1,000 years. The air grows a little colder as you move away from the sheltered harbour, and you feel the dampness of the sea on your face, a fine mist that you can barely see, but that settles on your skin like a cool cloth. The clouds overhead remain unchanged, their undersides a smooth, unbroken blanket that hides the sun's position so that you cannot tell if it is still morning or already approaching noon. It does not matter. Time is now measured only by the stroke of the oars and the slow change in the water's colour from murky green to a darker, clearer grey that speaks of depth beneath the keel. The ship rises and falls on the first of the true swells, a long, gentle motion that lifts the prow and then lets it down again with a sigh, and the oars dip a little deeper and pull a little harder, keeping the rhythm steady. You look back once more and see the harbour entrance as a gap in the high ground, the dock now invisible, only the smoke from the longhouse still visible as a faint smudge against the grey. Then even that is gone, and there is only the fjord widening toward the open sea, the water growing more lively under the bow, and the quiet, steady progress of a ship and her crew moving into the grey day without any need for hurry or words. The knarr feels solid and sure beneath you, and you settle more deeply into your seat, letting your shoulders relax and your gaze rest on the endless, soft horizon that waits ahead, a line as gentle as the space between one breath and the next. The mooring lines come free with a few easy movements, the rope coiling onto the deck in loose loops that settle without hurry. You stand near the tiller, watching the last connection to the dock slip away, and the ship responds by drifting a little, nudged by an unseen current that moves under the dark hull like a slow breath. The gap between the tarred planks and the wet wood widens from the width of a hand to an arm's length, and the water that fills that space is murky and still, its surface unbroken except for a single drifting feather that spins once and then passes out of sight under the stern. The air is cool and damp, carrying the mingled sense of salt, wet timber, and a trace of smoke from the settlement that is now behind you, and the sky remains a smooth layer of cloud without any break or variation. You take your place at the tiller, a long oar fixed to the starboard side of the stern, its shaft worn to a dark polish where many hands before yours have gripped it. The wood is smooth and slightly warm from the air, and it fits into your palm as if shaped for that purpose alone. You rest your hand on it, feeling not a vibration yet, but a waiting stillness. The rudder beneath the water, holding steady in the gentle current. Around you, the crew moves with the same unhurried calm, their boots making soft sounds on the deck, their voices so low they are barely more than murmurs that blend with the lapping of the water against the hull. No one gives a command. The skipper, standing near the mast with one hand resting on the furled sail, simply nods once, and the men at the oars begin to run out the long wooden shafts through the round ports along the sides. The oars slide out with a series of soft, scraping sounds, each one a slightly different note depending on the wood and the tightness of the leather lining inside the port. Their blades, broad and shaped like long leaves, dip into the dark water with a quiet splash that is more like a gentle kiss than a noise, sending small ripples that spread out and disappear into the harbour. The rowers seat themselves on sea chests that are lashed to the deck, each man finding his place without confusion, and they grip the oar handles with both hands, their shoulders settling into a relaxed posture that speaks of long practice. Then the first stroke begins, not to a beat or a call, but to a shared rhythm that seems to come from the ship itself, a slow pull that draws the oar blades back through the water and sends the knarr forward with a quiet surge. You feel the vibration through the hull immediately, a low, steady thrum that travels up through the deck, into your sea chest seat, and through the soles of your boots. The tiller presses lightly against your palm as the ship begins to move, and you make a tiny adjustment to keep the prow pointing straight down the channel, the motion so slight it is more intention than action. The rowers maintain their pace, their breathing even and deep, the oars creaking in their wooden locks with each pull in a steady repetition that is as comforting as a heartbeat. The sound is a soft groan, followed by a splash, then a pause during the recovery, then the groan and splash again, over and over without variation, and it marks the first steps of the journey with a calm certainty. The knarr picks up a gentle speed, moving past the last of the harbour's wooden buildings and the rocky shore where the fishing boats are drawn up. You can see the details of the settlement receding, the longhouse with its sod roof, the smoke holes still sending up a thin wisp that bends and fades into the grey sky, the path leading down to the dock, now empty of people. The woman with the bucket is gone, the man rolling the barrel has disappeared, and even the gull that perched on the piling has taken wing, gliding low over the water before veering off toward the open sea. The whole scene grows smaller and softer, the colours fading into the uniform grey of the clouded morning until the shore becomes just a dark band of rock and moss and low vegetation that separates the water from the sky. The water under the keel deepens as you move further from the harbour, and you notice the change in its colour. Near the dock it was murky and green-brown, stirred by the movements of the settlement and the inflow of a small stream, but now it shifts to a darker grey, clearer and more transparent, so that you can see the shadow of the hull rippling on the surface below if you lean over the side. The fjord walls rise gently on either side, bare rock that has been polished smooth by ancient ice, their surfaces streaked with vertical lines of darker stone where water seeps down from the heights. Patches of bright moss cling to the rock in places, vivid green against the grey, and they catch what little light there is, blowing softly like pieces of damp velvet. The walls are not sheer, but slope upward in a series of shoulders and ledges, and in some places you can see the stunted shapes of birch trees, their branches still bare from the winter, reaching out over the water with a kind of patient stillness. The air remains cool and carries the clean scent of the sea mixed with wet stone, a smell that is both empty and full at the same time. There is no wind yet, only the movement of the ship through the still air creating a faint breeze on your face, just enough to stir the loose strands of hair that have escaped your hood. The clouds overhead are so low that they seem to brush the tops of the fjord walls, their undersides a smooth, unbroken blanket of grey that diffuses the light evenly so that shadows are soft and barely visible. You cannot see the sun, cannot tell if it is still morning or if the day has slipped into a timeless noon, and it does not matter because the only measure of time now is the steady stroke of the oars and the slow rhythmic rise and fall of the ship on the gentle swells. The rowers settle into their work as if they could continue for hours without tiring, their strokes long and unhurried, the blades pulling cleanly through the water and then lifting just enough to feather back for the next pull. You watch the man nearest to you, the young sailor with the shadow of a beard, and see how his eyes are half closed, his attention turned inward, his body moving with the oar as if the two were one thing. The older man with the grey-streaked hair rose on the opposite side, his movements slower but just as steady, and you notice that he has pushed back the sleeves of his tunic to bare his forearms, the muscles moving under the skin with each stroke. The skipper remains near the mast, his hand still resting on the furled sail, his gaze fixed on the water ahead, and he does not speak. There is nothing to say, because the ship is doing exactly what it is meant to do, and everyone on board knows their part. The soundscape of the fjord surrounds you like a soft blanket, every noise clear yet muted by the heavy air. The creak of the oars in the locks is the dominant note, a sound that has a wooden, organic quality, each creak slightly different depending on the oar and the man pulling it. Underneath that is the splash of the blades, a gentle sound of water being moved, not slapped, and then the subtle hiss of the bow wave as the knarr cuts through the surface. The hull itself makes a low, continuous groan, a deep sound that is the ship's voice speaking to the sea, and you can hear it best when you press your hand flat against the gunwale, feeling the vibration travel up your arm. There are other sounds too, the drip of water from the oar blades as they swing forward, the rustle of wool as a man shifts his weight, the tap of a loose line against the mast, and somewhere high above, the distant cry of a bird that you cannot see. You close your eyes for a moment and let the sounds blend into a single steady rhythm that is as old as the first ship that ever crossed these waters. When you open them again, nothing has changed except that the fjord walls have widened just a little, and the patches of moss have given way to bare rock that looks darker and more weathered. The water is deeper now, a cold, clear grey that seems to have no bottom, and you can see the reflection of the clouds on its surface, a mirror image that is broken into soft fragments by the ship's passage. The tiller in your hand communicates the mood of the sea directly to you. Each gentle swell lifts the stern and then lets it settle, and you feel the rudder respond with a slight tug, a conversation between the wood and the water that you mediate with the smallest movements of your wrist. The crew continues to row with the same unhurried pace, and you realize that you have been at the tiller for some time, though you could not say how long. The young sailor has shifted his grip on the oar handle, and the grey-haired man has pulled a cloth from his belt and wiped his forehead before tucking it away again. The skipper has moved to the bow, where he stands with one foot on the stem, looking ahead with the same calm expression he wore in the harbour. The furled sail still rests on the yard, its striped fabric bound tight with leather strips, and the mast rises straight and solid against the grey sky, a dark line that draws your eye upward and then lets it go. The rigging hangs in loose, orderly curves, and a single drop of moisture gathers at the end of a line, growing larger and larger until it falls soundlessly to the deck. The fjord takes a gentle bend to the left, and you adjust the tiller just enough to follow the curve, the ship responding with a smooth turn that sends a slightly larger ripple of water against the starboard side. You can see the rock wall on that side more clearly now, its surface marked with horizontal striations where the ancient ice scraped its way down to the sea, and in some places the rock is broken into angular blocks that have tumbled down to form a rough slope at the water's edge. A few tufts of grass grow in the cracks, and a single seabird perches on a small ledge, its body tucked into a ball, its head turned to watch the ship pass by. The bird does not move as you glide past, only follows you with its dark eye for a long moment before tucking its beak under its wing and going still. The air grows a little colder as the fjord opens further, and you feel the dampness on your cheeks and the tip of your nose. Your cloak, a heavy wool of dark brown, has absorbed some of the moisture and hangs a little more heavily on your shoulders, but it is still warm, and the scent of lanolin rises faintly from the fabric when you move. Your hands are cool but not cold, and you flex your fingers on the tiller to keep the blood moving. The rowers, too, seem unaffected by the temperature. Their breath comes in small clouds that appear for a moment and then vanish, and the young sailor has a faint flush on his cheeks that is the only sign of his exertion. Time passes in the way it does on the water, smoothly and without markers. The fjord walls begin to lose their height, sloping down toward the sea in a series of lower, rounder hills that are covered with heather and brown grass, the rock giving way to soil that was deposited by glaciers long ago. You can see the open water ahead, a slightly lighter band of grey that marks where the fjord ends and the North Sea begins, and the ship seems to sense it too, because the motion changes subtly, the swells becoming longer and deeper as the shelter of the land falls away. The rowers pull a little harder, just enough to keep the speed steady against the growing influence of the open water, and the skipper turns from the bow and walks back toward the mast, his footsteps quiet on the deck. He pauses near you, looking at the tiller and then at your face, and you nod once to let him know that all is well. He nods back, a small gesture that is almost lost in the folds of his hood, and then he moves on to check the lashings on the cargo, his hands touching each knot with a brief, assured pressure. You watch him as he works, seeing the way his fingers move with the ease of long practice, and then your attention returns to the water ahead, where the grey of the sky and the grey of the sea meet in a line that is soft and slightly blurred by the mist that hangs just above the surface. The oars continue their steady rhythm, the creak and splash repeating over and over like a simple tune that you have heard all your life. The ship rides the swells with a gentle, rolling motion, and you shift your weight slightly to stay balanced, your body adjusting without conscious thought. The color of the water has changed again, from the dark grey of the deep fjord to a lighter, more silvery grey that reflects the clouds more brightly, and you can see small patches of foam on the surface where the swells break just a little, tiny white flecks that appear and disappear in an instant. The air smells more strongly of the sea now, the wet stone of the fjord replaced by the clean, sharp scent of salt, and the faint, organic smell of kelp and fish and all the life that moves under the surface. The young sailor, the one with the shadow of a beard, pauses in his rowing for a moment to take a drink from a leather water bottle that hangs near his seat. He uncorks it with his teeth, tips it up and drinks slowly, his throat moving with each swallow, then corks it again and hangs it back in place. The other rowers do not break their rhythm. They wait for him to rejoin the stroke, and when he does, the pace resumes as if it had never stopped. This small interruption, this quiet moment of human need, reminds you that you too are thirsty, and you reach for your own water skin, a smaller one tucked inside your sea chest, and drink a few mouthfuls of cool, slightly brackish water that tastes of the leather container and the distant stream where it was filled. The fjord is behind you now, the last headland sliding past on your left, and the sea opens up before the bow in a vast, empty expanse that stretches to the horizon without any feature to break its surface. The swells are deeper here, lifting the ship from behind and then letting it settle with a long, slow sigh, and the oars dig deeper and pull against a water that is heavier and more resistant. The skipper speaks for the first time since the harbour, a low word that carries to the rowers, and they ship their oars with a final, clean stroke, the blades lifted clear of the water and drawn inboard, where they are laid along the deck and secured with leather loops. The ship rocks gently while hands grasp halyard and sheets, and the great square sail begins to rise. That is the moment you know the open sea has truly begun. But for now, the oars are still, and the quiet of the drift settles over the deck as the crew prepares for the next part of the voyage, their movements calm and deliberate, the ship gliding forward under its own momentum like a creature that knows its way without any need for haste. The fjord widens gradually, its rocky walls sloping down into low, rounded hills that recede on either side until they become mere shadows on the grey horizon, and the ship moves with them, carried by the last strokes of the oars into the open water. You feel the change before you see it, a subtle shift in the motion of the hull as the shelter of the land falls away and the deeper swells of the North Sea begin to lift the knarr from beneath. The rowing continues at the same steady pace for a while longer, the oars creaking and splashing with that familiar rhythm that has marked the passage of the morning. But the skipper is watching the water ahead with his calm, steady gaze, and after a time he speaks a low word that carries just enough to be heard by the men at the oars. His voice is not a command, but an observation, A quiet note that the moment has arrived and the rowers finish their stroke, lift the blades clear of the water, and rest the oar handles on their thighs without any haste. The ship rocks softly in the sudden silence, the cessation of the rhythmic splashing leaving a void that is quickly filled by the other sounds of the sea, the lapping of water against the hull, the creak of the mast, the faint sigh of the breeze that has begun to stir across the open expanse. The oars are not yet drawn in, but remain extended from the ports like the legs of a resting insect, their blades dripping a slow succession of droplets that fall into the grey water with tiny, irregular plinks. You keep your hand on the tiller, feeling the rudder swing just a little with each gentle roll, the pressure against your palm as light as a breath, and you watch as the crew begins to move toward the mast and the sheets with the same unhurried purpose they have shown all morning. Hands grasp the halyard, a thick rope of tarred hemp that runs up through a block near the masthead, and other hands take hold of the sheets, the lines that will control the sail once it is set. The men position themselves without confusion, each one knowing his place, and the skipper nods once, a small gesture that is almost invisible in the grey light. Then the pulling begins, a series of quiet tugs that travel up the halyard and lift a heavy yard from its resting supports. The sail, still furled tightly to the yard, rises from the deck where it has lain like a sleeping animal, its striped wool fabric rustling with a sound like a heavy blanket being unfolded. You watch the yard climb the mast in short, smooth increments, each pull from the men below sending it a little higher, and the rigging creaks with a deeper note, a sound of tension and weight that speaks of the forces about to be awakened. The wool sail remains bound to the yard by leather strips spaced at intervals, and as it rises, it catches the first tentative fingers of the breeze, the fabric stirring and fluttering along its lower edge. The rustling grows louder for a moment, a soft, busy sound like the wings of many birds taking flight, and then the yard reaches its full height, and the halyard is made fast around a cleat with a few quick turns. The sail hangs loose now, suspended from the yard like a curtain waiting to be drawn, its stripes of muted red and brown on a natural cream ground all wrinkled and folded from being furled so long. The men at the sheet stand ready, their hands gripping the coarse ropes, and everyone on board seems to hold a collective breath as the ship continues to rock gently, the mast swaying in a slow circle against the grey sky. The wind finds the sail a moment later, a wandering puff of air that comes from the northwest and presses against the heavy wool with a soft, insistent hand. There is a gentle snap as the fabric catches, a sound like a large flag unfurling, and then the sail begins to fill, the folds smoothing out and the stripes straightening as the wool draws taut. The process is gradual, the canvas billowing outward a little at a time, and the sound it makes is a sustained sigh, a deep, contented exhalation of a creature that has been waiting and is now satisfied. The ship responds immediately, the hull leaning just a little to starboard as the pressure of the wind transfers through the sheets to the mast and then to the entire vessel, and you feel the tiller push lightly against your hand with a new, living force that was not there before. The oars are drawn in now, the men pulling them through the ports with a few easy motions and laying them along the deck where they are secured with leather loops to keep them from rolling. Water drips from the blades in slow, deliberate lines, leaving dark spots on the wooden planks that will soon dry in the moving air. The rowers stow their oars and then find places to sit or lean, their work done for the moment, and the ship settles into a new rhythm under sail, a steady and unhurried progress that is different from the rowing, but just as constant. You adjust your grip on the tiller to account for the slight pull, feeling the balance of the ship through the wood, and you set a course that exists only in the feel of the wind on your cheek and the angle of the swell against the hull. The knarr leans just a little, the long hole cutting through the grey water with a soft, continuous hiss, and the bow wave curls away from the stem in a gentle froth of white that spreads out and disappears into the dark surface. The clouds remain unbroken overhead, their colour a uniform soft pewter that diffuses the light so evenly that the sea and the sky seem to blend together at the horizon without a definite line, just a pale seam where one grey meets another. You look out across the water and see nothing but the gentle, rolling swells that stretch in all directions, their surfaces marked by the faint, darker patches where a breeze touches them and then moves on. The world is reduced to the ship and the sea and the sky, a simple trinity of elements that asks nothing of you but to remain present and steady. The crew settles into the quiet routine of the open water, each man finding his own small occupation to pass the time. One man coils a rope that has been lying loose near the mast, his hands moving in a circular pattern that winds the hemp into a neat, flat spiral, the fibers rasping softly against each other with each turn. Another man adjusts a leather cover over the cargo amidships, pulling the edges down tight and securing the ties with a series of small knots that he checks with a tug of his fingers, the leather creaking faintly under the strain. The grey-haired man sits on his sea chest near the stern, a bone needle in his hand and a torn net spread across his lap, and he begins to mend the holes with the same steady rhythm he used while rowing, his lips moving silently as he counts the stitches. The young sailor, with the shadow of a beard, takes a whetstone from a pouch and begins to sharpen a small knife, the stone making a soft, scraping sound that blends with the other noises, and he pauses now and then to test the edge with his thumb, his expression one of complete absorption. The rhythmic sound of water along the hull becomes a constant, a hush that never changes no matter how long you listen, and it wraps around you like a blanket, muffling all other thoughts. The ship moves forward with a gentle rolling motion, lifting on the swells and then settling back with a sigh, and the mast describes a slow circle against the grey sky, tracing the same path over and over. You feel the vibration of the hull through your seat, a low, steady thrum that is the ship's heartbeat, and you match your breathing to it without thinking, letting the rhythm carry you along. The tiller in your hand communicates every nuance of the sea, a slight increase in pressure when a swell lifts the stern, a brief release when it passes, a tiny tug to the left when the wind shifts a fraction, and you respond with movements so small they are almost imperceptible, your wrist and fingers making adjustments that keep the ship on its course. The air remains cool and damp, carrying the clean scent of the open sea, and you can taste the salt on your lips, a faint, mineral tang that is as familiar as the feel of the wood under your hand. The breeze that fills the sail is steady, not strong enough to raise whitecaps, but enough to keep the wall taut and the ship moving at a walking pace, a speed that feels unhurried and eternal. You watch the water slide past the hull, an arm's length from your seat, and you notice the subtle variations in its color. Near the ship it is a dark, frothy grey, churned by the passage of the bow, but further out it lightens to a silvery sheen that reflects the clouds in a broken mirror of soft shapes. There are no birds now, no floating weed, no sign of land, only the endless, repeating pattern of the swells that roll toward you from the northwest and pass under the keel with a gentle lift and fall. The skipper moves about the deck with his calm, unhurried gait, checking each lashing and every piece of gear with a touch of his hand, and then he pauses near the mast and looks up at the sail, his eyes tracing the curve of the wool from yard to sheet. He adjusts the tension of one of the lines, with a small movement, a tug that barely shifts the rope in its block, and then he nods to himself and walks back to the stern where you are sitting. He does not speak, but leans against the gunwale, his arms folded, and he gazes out at the horizon with an expression that holds no concern, only a quiet patience that has been shaped by many voyages across this same grey water. You glance at him and then look back at the tiller, and the two of you share the silence without any need to fill it with words. Time begins to soften into a repeating pattern of small, gentle events that mark the passage of the hours, without any urgency. The sun remains hidden behind the thick layer of cloud, so you cannot track its movement across the sky, and the only measure of the day is the slow change in the quality of the light, which dims and brightens in cycles so subtle they are almost subliminal. You notice that the wet spots on the deck where the oars dripped have dried, the wood returning to its usual grey-brown colour, and that the rope the man coiled earlier is now stowed under a bench, its neat spiral a small monument to careful work. The man with the whetstone has put away his knife and is now leaning against the side, his eyes half closed, and the grey-haired man has finished mending the net and is rolling it into a bundle, his fingers tucking in the loose ends with a practiced efficiency. The sail continues its steady pull, the wool fabric holding its shape without any need for adjustment, and the ship leans into the wind with a constancy that feels as permanent as the sea itself. You shift your weight slightly on the sea chest, feeling the coarse wool of your cloak under your thighs, and you pull the hood a little further forward to shield your neck from the damp air. The fabric is heavy and warm, and it smells of lanolin and the smoke from a hearth that is now far behind you. A scent that anchors you to the solid world even as the ship carries you across a sea that has no landmarks. Your hands on the tiller are steady, the wood smooth and familiar, and you feel a kind of quiet contentment settling over you. A peace that comes from doing a simple task in a simple way without any need for hurry or thought. The horizon remains that pale seam where sea and sky meet without a definite line. A boundary that is always present and never reached, and you find yourself gazing at it for long stretches of time, your eyes unfocused and your mind drifting into a calm, empty state that is neither sleep nor waking, but something in between. The sounds of the ship wrap around you like a lullaby, the hush of the water along the hull, the creak of the rigging, the occasional soft thud of a rope tapping against the mast, the steady breathing of the resting crewman. These sounds are so constant that they become part of the background, noticed only when you deliberately turn your attention to them, and then they fade back into the general hum of the voyage. A small stray thought passes through your mind about the cargo, the bundles of dried fish and the barrels of goods that are stowed amidships, and you wonder briefly about the people who will receive them at the journey's end. But the thought does not linger. It drifts away like a bit of foam on the water, and your mind returns to the simple present of the tiller in your hand and the grey sky overhead. The skipper shifts his weight against the gunwale, his boots making a soft sound on the deck, and he reaches into a pouch at his belt to pull out a piece of dried meat, which he chews slowly, his jaw moving in a steady rhythm that matches the ship's motion. He offers you a piece with a raised eyebrow, and you shake your head slightly, not hungry yet, and he nods and puts the pouch away, his gaze returning to the horizon. The afternoon, if it is still afternoon, wears on in this manner, with the sail pulling, the hull hissing, and the clouds holding their unbroken cover overhead. The light begins to take on a slightly deeper tone, the grey shifting toward a shade that hints at the approach of evening, though there is no way to be certain. The skipper finally straightens and walks forward to check the sail again, his hand resting on the mast for a moment, as if to feel the pulse of the ship, and then he returns and speaks a few quiet words to the young sailor, who nods and takes a turn at the tiller, giving you a chance to rest. You surrender the wooden shaft with a nod of thanks and stand up, stretching your legs for the first time in many hours, feeling the stiffness in your knees and the pleasant ache of muscles that have been still too long. You walk slowly forward along the deck, your boots making soft sounds on the planks, and you pause at the bow to look out at the endless repeating seascape, the grey water stretching away to every horizon without any difference or marker. The bow rises and falls with a gentle, rhythmic motion, and you feel the spray on your face, a fine mist that is cool and refreshing, carrying the deep, mineral smell of the open ocean. You stand there for a while, letting the motion soothe you, and then you walk back to the stern, past the cargo with its leather cover, past the mast with its taut rigging, and you resume your place at the tiller, taking the smooth wood back into your hand with a sense of returning to a familiar task. The young sailor gives you a small smile and moves off to find his own resting place, and you settle back into the rhythm of steering. The ship and the sea and the sky, all unchanged, the voyage truly begun under the hidden sun, a quiet, steady progress across the grey water that will continue for as long as it needs to, without any hurry, without any end in sight, just the gentle, eternal drift of a Norse knarr, crossing the North Sea under the cloudy, starless sky. Time softens into a repeating pattern of watches, the hours losing their sharp edges and blending together into a smooth, continuous flow that is measured only by the slow exchange of places at the tiller. The sail remains full and steady, the wool fabric holding its curved shape against the grey sky, and the knarr leans into the wind with a constancy that feels as permanent as the sea itself. You have been at the steering oar for a long stretch, your hand resting on the smooth wood, your eyes watching the horizon that never changes, and you feel a quiet tiredness settling into your shoulders, not uncomfortable but simply present, a gentle reminder that you are human and that rest will come in its proper time. The skipper notices without being told, because he has watched many helmsmen on many voyages and knows the signs, and he walks aft with his calm, unhurried stride and touches your shoulder with a light hand, a wordless signal that your watch is ending. You surrender the tiller with a nod of thanks, feeling the weight of responsibility lift as the skipper takes the wooden shaft into his own grip, his hand settling onto the worn spot as if they belong there. You stand up slowly, your legs stiff from sitting so long, and you stretch your arms over your head, feeling the pull of muscles that have been still, the pleasant ache spreading through your back and shoulders. The deck moves under your feet with that gentle, rolling rhythm you have grown so accustomed to that you no longer notice it, your body adjusting automatically to each lift and fall without any conscious thought. You walk forward along the deck, past the mast with its taut rigging, past the cargo covered by its leather sheet, and you find a space near the bow where a pile of sheepskins has been laid out as a resting place for the off-watch crew. The sheepskins are thick and woolly, their fleece still carrying the faint sweet smell of lanolin and the sharper tang of wood smoke from the curing fire, and you lower yourself onto them with a slow, careful movement, feeling the softness yield under your weight. You arrange your cloak around you, pulling the hood up to shield your face from the damp air, and you lie on your side with your head pillowed on a folded corner of the fleece, your gaze turned toward the side of the ship, where the grey water slides past an arm's length away. The sheepskins envelop you in a cocoon of warmth, and you feel the tension of the long watch begin to dissolve, your muscles loosening and your breathing deepening as you settle into the rest. Around you, the other off-watch crewmen are already lying in similar positions, their shape still and their breathing slow, each man wrapped in his own cloak or skin, the only visible parts of them, the vague outlines of shoulders and the occasional shift of a foot. The grey-haired man lies nearest to you, his eyes closed and his mouth slightly open, and you can hear the soft, regular sound of his breath, a gentle in and out that matches the rhythm of the swells. The young sailor with the shadow of a beard is curled on his other side, his back against a coil of rope, and he has pulled a corner of sheepskin over his head so that only a tuft of his hair is visible, dark against the pale fleece. No one speaks. The only sounds are the ever-present hush of water along the hull, the creak of the rigging, and the slow, deep breathing of resting men. You close your eyes for a while, not sleeping but drifting in a state that is somewhere between waking and dreaming, your mind floating on the sounds of the ship like a leaf on a slow river. You are aware of the motion, the lift and fall that never stops, and you are aware of the smell of wool and salt and tar, and you are aware of the warmth of the sheepskin under your cheek, but these sensations are distant and soft, requiring no response from you. Time passes without any measure, and when you open your eyes again, the light has changed by a small degree, the grey of the sky deepening just a little toward a shade that suggests the hidden sun is moving lower, and you know that another watch has passed, even though you could not say how long you lay there. You sit up slowly, pushing the sheepskin aside, and you see that the crew has rearranged itself in the quiet order of the watch rotation. The skipper is still at the tiller, his figure a dark, steady shape against the grey sky, and the man who was resting beside you is now up and moving about the deck, coiling a loose line that has been tapping against the mast. The young sailor is taking his turn at the lookout, standing near the bow with one hand on the stem, and his gaze fixed on the empty water ahead. Everything has changed and nothing has changed. The ship is still moving at the same steady pace. The clouds are still unbroken, and the sea is still the same endless expanse of grey swells that roll toward you from the northwest and pass under the keel with a gentle lift and fall. You rise to your feet and stretch again, feeling the refreshed ease in your limbs, and you walk aft to take your turn at the tiller, because that is the pattern, and it will continue as long as the voyage lasts. The skipper sees you coming and steps aside without a word, and you take the smooth wooden shaft back into your hand, feeling the living pressure of the rudder transmitted through the grain. He gives you a small nod, his beard moving just a fraction, and then he walks forward to find his own rest, his boots making soft sounds on the deck that fade into the general hum of the ship. You settle into your seat on the sea chest, adjust the tiller by the width of a finger, and the watch begins again, the same as the one before it and the same as the one that will follow. The wind holds steady from the northwest, the constant pressure against your left cheek that tells you the ship is holding its course, and you keep the tiller steady with a relaxed grip, making only the smallest corrections when a swell lifts the stern and tries to nudge the bow off its line. The clouds, dense and featureless, offer no star or moon to guide by, and they will not offer any when night falls. But the sailors know the water's moods and the feel of the wind, and they can steer by these invisible signs as surely as by any landmark. You are learning this yourself, through the long hours at the tiller, how the pressure of the wind on your skin is a compass, how the angle of the swells against the hull is a map, how the ship herself will tell you when she is happy with her course and when she is fighting the sea. These are lessons that cannot be taught in words, only absorbed through the hands and the body and the long, patient hours of attention. You watch the small compass of the ship's world, the curved prow rising and dipping with a slow, regular motion, the bow wave curling away from the stem in a gentle froth that is the only white in all the grey. The prow carving, that worn spiral that was shaped by some long-ago hand, rises against the clouds and then sinks back, rises and sinks, a steady hypnotic rhythm that you could watch for hours without tiring. The mast creaks at the same place in the ship's roll each time, a low wooden groan that comes just as the stern begins to lift on a swell, and then it fades as the ship settles back, only to come again with the next wave. This sound is so predictable that you find yourself waiting for it, and when it comes, it is like a familiar voice speaking a single word over and over, a word that means nothing but is somehow comforting. The sheepskins you rested on are now occupied by the skipper, who has taken your former place near the bow, and you can see his dark shape lying still among the pale fleeces, his cloak pulled up over his shoulders. The other off watchmen are also resting, their breathing slow and deep, and the deck is quiet except for the small sounds of the ship that never stop. The man who was coiling the line has finished his task and is now sitting on a sea chest near the mast, a piece of dried fish in his hand, and he chews it slowly, his jaw moving in a steady rhythm that matches the ship's motion. He looks over at you once, his expression calm and without any message, and then he looks away, his attention returning to the simple act of eating. The air cools as the unseen sun drops further, the temperature falling by degrees so small that you only notice the change when you realize that your hands are a little colder than they were, and you tuck them into the sleeves of your cloak for a moment to warm them. The breeze that fills the sail carries a deeper chill now, a hint of the long night ahead, and you pull your hood a little tighter round your face, the wool soft and familiar against your skin. The smell of the sea seems sharper in the cooling air, the salt and the kelp and the clean empty scent of the open water, all distinct and clear, and you breathe it in deeply, feeling it fill your lungs with a cold refreshing purity. The grey light deepens toward an even softer darkness, the clouds thickening just a little so that the world seems to contract around the ship, the horizon drawing closer and the details of the deck becoming more muted. The stripes in the sail are harder to see now, their colours fading into a uniform grey, and the faces of the resting men are just pale blurs against the dark wool of their cloaks. The young sailor at the bow is a silhouette, his shape outlined against the slightly lighter grey of the sky, and he does not move except to shift his weight from one foot to the other now and then, a small adjustment that is the only sign he is not a carving. You keep the tiller steady and watch the darkness gather, feeling the ship move under you with that same eternal rhythm, and you think that this is what the voyage is, a long, slow drift through a grey room that has no walls and no floor, only the gentle repeating motion of the sea. The watch changes again with the same quiet simplicity, the skipper rising from the sheepskins and walking aft to relieve you, and you go forward to rest once more, the pattern repeating like the turning of a wheel. This time when you lie down, the sheepskins are still warm from his body, and you pull them around you gratefully, feeling the heat seep into your chilled hands and face. You close your eyes and listen to the sounds of the ship, the hush of the water, the creak of the mast, the soft breathing of the men around you, and you let yourself drift into a state that is almost sleep, a suspended place where thoughts come and go like small waves on a calm shore. You might think of the settlement you left behind, the long house with its sod roof and the smoke rising from the hole, or you might think of nothing at all, your mind as empty and peaceful as the sea. When you wake again, the darkness is complete, or nearly so, the clouds so thick that no hint of moon or star can break through, and the world is reduced to the ship and the immediate sea around it. You can barely see the prow from where you lie, only the faintest suggestion of the curving stem against the black, and the white of the bow foam when the ship surges just a little on a swell. You sit up slowly, pushing the sheepskin aside, and you feel the cold air on your face, sharp and clean. The skipper is still at the tiller, a dark shape against the darker sky, and you know that he has been there for a long time, steering by the feel of the wind and the rhythm of the swells, a guidance that comes from long practice and a deep familiarity with the ship. You rise and walk aft, your boots finding the deck with the ease of habit, and you touch the skipper's shoulder to let him know you are there. He steps aside and you take the tiller, the wood cold and smooth under your hands, and you settle into the watch as the ship continues its steady progress through the starless night. The darkness has a heavy, soft quality, like a blanket, and it muffles even the small sounds so that the whole world seems to drift in a suspended quiet. You feel the rudder respond to the sea, the pressure against your palm a conversation that never ends, and you steer the ship through the black water with a calm certainty that has grown in you over the many watches, a quiet confidence that you are exactly where you are meant to be, doing exactly what you are meant to do, in the long, slow rhythm of the crossing. In the quiet of the crossing, your awareness narrows to the small, repeating sensations of the knarr, the world beyond the gunwales fading into a formless grey that exists only as a backdrop for the ship's own intimate life. You are at the tiller again, the watch having turned over in its silent, orderly way, and the darkness of the night has softened into a deep charcoal that hints at the approach of another clouded day. The wind holds steady, the sail pulls with its gentle, constant pressure, and the sea swells lift and release the hull in a rhythm so old that it feels like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Your hand rests on the smooth wood of the steering oar, and your eyes, half closed, see not the horizon, but the immediate things close at hand. The grain of the tiller, the frayed end of a rope, the dark shape of the cargo under its leather cover, all of them part of a small universe that moves with you across the water. The first thing you notice, as the grey light begins its slow return, is the smell of the tarred rigging. It is a bitter-sweet scent, sharp and resinous, that hangs in the air like a thin, invisible smoke, and it shifts in intensity as the wind breathes through the ropes and blocks. When the breeze strengthens just a little, the smell grows stronger, filling your nostrils with a tang that is almost medicinal, a clean, astringent note that cuts through the dampness of the sea air. Then the breeze eases, and the scent retreats, becoming a faint background presence that lingers without demanding attention, blending with the other smells until you almost forget it is there, only to notice it again when the wind stirs once more. The ropes themselves, thick and dark with pitch, glisten slightly where the moisture has beaded on their surfaces, and when a line shifts against the mast, a tiny puff of that tar scent rises, invisible but real, and drifts past your face like a ghost. The damp wool of your tunic holds its own smell, a compound of salt from the spray in the sea, lanolin from the sheep that grew the fleece, and the faint earthy scent of the hearth smoke that has worked its way deep into the fibres over many months of wear. You know this smell as well as you know the shape of your own hands. It is the smell of home and warmth and shelter, and it rises from the fabric whenever you move, a personal atmosphere that wraps around you like a second cloak. The salt in the wool gives it a slightly stiff texture, and when you rub a fold between your fingers, you can feel the tiny crystals that have dried there, a fine grit that is not uncomfortable but simply present, a reminder that the sea is always with you, even in the clothes you wear. A small lantern hangs from a hook near the mast, its flame shielded by a circle of thin, scraped horn that glows with a warm amber light, and the smell of the burning oil adds a new layer to the air. It is a faint, warm odor, not greasy, but somehow clean, with a hint of something that might be fish oil rendered long ago, and it mixes with the cold dampness of the sea to create a pocket of comfort around the mast. You can see the flame through the horn panel, a small wavering star that burns steadily without flickering, because the ship's motion is so gentle that the oil barely sloshes in its reservoir. The lantern's light casts soft, moving shadows on the deck and on the faces of the resting men, and the smell of it reaches you in occasional waves, a quiet companion that says you are not alone in the grey expanse. The cargo of dried cod, stowed amidships under its leather cover, sends up a mild, clean fish smell that is more like the sea itself than anything separate, a briny, mineral scent that lacks the sharpness of fresh fish, and has instead a dry, concentrated essence, as if the ocean had been distilled into a powder. It is not unpleasant, but rather familiar, a smell that has been part of every voyage you can remember, and it mingles with the tar and the wool and the oil to create the unique perfume of the knarr. When the leather cover shifts slightly with the ship's motion, a faint puff of that dry cod scent escapes, stronger for a moment, and then it dissipates, absorbed into the general atmosphere. The barrels of other goods, the salted butter hanging in its net, the small clay pots of preserved berries, all add their own subtle notes. Though they are sealed and quiet, their smells only detectable if you put your nose close, which you do not. The ship itself is a source of constant, gentle music that never stops, a symphony of small repeating sounds that your mind learns to anticipate and then ignore, letting them fade into a soothing background hum. The low groan of the wooden frame as it works against the sea is the deepest note, a sound that comes from the very bones of the knarr, and it happens at the same place in each roll. A long, creaking exhale that begins just as the stern starts to lift on a swell and ends when the ship settles back into the trough. This groan has a wooden, organic quality, not a complaint, but a statement, the ship speaking to the water in a language that has no words. You feel it through the deck as much as you hear it, a vibration that travels up through the tiller and into your hands, and it is so regular that you could set your breathing by it, a slow in and out that matches the rise and fall. The whisper of water sliding past the planks is another constant, a soft, hissing sound that is always there, an arm's length from your seat, and it varies slightly depending on the speed of the ship and the texture of the sea's surface. When the wind is steady and the knarr is moving well, the hiss is smooth and continuous, a white noise that wraps around you like a blanket. But when the breeze falters for a moment and the ship slows, the sound becomes gentler, more like a lapping, a quiet conversation between the wood and the water. You can hear it best if you lean your head toward the gunwale, and sometimes you do, letting the sound fill your ears until all other thoughts are washed away, leaving only the soft, liquid murmur that has no beginning and no end. The occasional tap of a loose line against the mast adds a higher, sharper note to the music. A small wooden click that comes at irregular intervals, never quite predictable, and it draws your attention for a moment before you let it go. The line is a halyard or a sheet that was not fully secured, its free end swinging just enough to strike the mast with a light, hollow sound, and one of the crew will eventually coil it and tie it off, but for now it is part of the chorus, a tiny percussion that keeps time with the ship's motion. You listen to it without irritation, because on this ship there is no irritation, only acceptance, and the tap becomes just another thread in the fabric of sound that surrounds you. The resting men add their own notes, the deep, slow breathing of the grey-haired sailor who lies curled under a sheepskin near the bow, a sound that rises and falls with a regularity that matches the sea, and the occasional rustle of wool as someone shifts in half sleep, turning onto a different side or pulling a cloak tighter around his shoulders. A quiet sigh escapes from one of the sleepers, a long, soft exhalation that carries no distress, only the release of tension, and then silence returns, the breathing continuing its steady rhythm. You listen to these human sounds with a kind of tenderness, because they are the sounds of your companions, men you know by their movements and their habits, even if you have spoken few words to them, and they are as much a part of the ship as the mast and the sail. From the stern, the tiny slap of a small wave against the rudder, makes a sound that is almost liquid and solid at the same time. A soft cupped noise like a hand patting the water. And it comes whenever the ship yaws just a little and the rudder bites into the sea at a slight angle. You feel the tiller twitch in response, and you correct the course with a movement so small it is almost unconscious, the slap fading as the rudder aligns again with the flow. This tiny sound is one that only the helmsman hears, because the other men are forward of the stern, and the noise does not carry over the general hiss of the hull, so it becomes a private signal between you and the ship, a reminder that you are guiding her and she is responding. The creak of the oars, still stowed along the sides and secured with their leather loops, adds an occasional groan when the ship rolls heavily and the shafts shift against each other, a sound of wood rubbing on wood that is deeper than the tap of the line and shorter than the groan of the frame. It happens maybe once in a watch, when a larger swell passes under the keel and the knarr leans a little more than usual, and then the oars settle back into silence, their work done for now, but their presence still felt. You have grown so accustomed to all these sounds that you no longer hear them as separate things. They have merged into a single continuous presence, a hum that is the ship's voice, and it is as familiar as your own heartbeat. The smells and sounds wrap around you in a cocoon of familiarity, each one so constant that it becomes part of the background, a lulling presence that asks nothing of your mind except to notice and then let go. You become aware of your own breathing, slow and deep, and you match it deliberately to the rhythm of the swell, a practice that some old sailor taught you long ago. Breathe in as the stern lifts, hold for a moment at the top, breathe out as the ship settles. This simple exercise calms the mind and passes the time, and you do it for a while, counting the breaths until you lose count and simply breathe, your thoughts drifting like the clouds that you cannot see. The lantern flame continues its steady burn, the horn shade glowing with that warm amber light, and the smell of the oil reaches you again, a faint, comforting warmth in the cool air. You notice that a drop of moisture has condensed on the outside of the horn, and it catches the light, a tiny, bright bead that trembles with the ship's motion but does not fall. The drop holds your attention for a long moment, a small, perfect world of reflected flame, and then your eyes move on, resting now on the grain of the deck planks, which run in long, parallel lines from bow to stern. The wood is grey-brown and slightly rough, worn by feet and weather, and in some places the grain swirls around old knots, creating patterns that your mind tries to turn into pictures, a bird in flight, a curling wave, a face that dissolves when you blink. The young sailor with the shadow of a beard is awake now, sitting on his sea chest and eating a piece of hard bread, and the sound of his chewing is a soft, rhythmic crunching that joins the other sounds. He dips the bread into a small cup of water to soften it, and you hear the faint splash of the liquid, then the quiet munching as he eats. The bread itself has a smell, a mild, yeasty scent that reminds you of the bakehouse at the settlement, the warm, doughy air that used to drift out when the door was opened, and for a moment you are back there, standing on the muddy path with the smell of fresh bread in your nose. But the memory fades as quickly as it came, replaced by the present reality of salt and tar and the open sea. The grey-haired man wakes also, stretching his arms with a soft groan, and he reaches for his water skin, uncorking it with a pop that is the loudest sound you have heard in hours. He drinks slowly, his throat moving with each swallow, and then he corks the skin and hangs it back on its peg. The whole sequence of sounds, a small, familiar ritual. He catches your eye and gives you a nod, a silent greeting that asks nothing and offers nothing except the acknowledgement of shared presence. And you nod back, the exchange as natural as breathing. Then he settles into his own thoughts, his gaze turning inward, and the ship carries you all forward through the grey morning that is neither light nor dark, but something in between. The smell of the sea itself, that vast, encompassing scent of salt and water and life, is always there, the foundation upon which all the other smells are built. It is a clean, sharp smell that clears the head and fills the lungs, and it has a depth that is impossible to describe, a complexity made from the countless creatures and plants that live in the water below, the minerals washed from distant shores, the spray that has been lifted into the air by waves thousands of miles away. You breathe it in and feel it on your skin, a fine salt layer that forms on your face and hands, and when you lick your lips you taste the ocean, a taste that is both familiar and endless. This salt layer makes your skin feel slightly tight, and you rub your fingers together, feeling the faint grittiness, a physical connection to the sea that never leaves you. The sound of the sail, that great square of striped wool, adds its own voice to the chorus, a soft, deep flapping noise when the wind falters for a moment and the canvas shivers, then a taut silence when the breeze steadies and the fabric draws firm. The sheets creak in their blocks as the tension comes and goes, a series of small, high-pitched squeaks that are the voice of the rigging, and the yard itself, that heavy wooden spar, shifts just slightly against the mast with a low rubbing sound that is more felt than heard. All these noises are so much a part of the ship that you would notice their absence more than their presence, and they continue without any need for your attention, a lullaby that has sung you across the sea since the voyage began. You rest your hand on the tiller and close your eyes for a moment, letting the sounds and smells wash over you, without naming them, experiencing the ship as a single, living entity that surrounds you and carries you. The cool air on your face, the warmth of the wool on your body, the gentle pressure of the wood under your hand, the smell of tar and salt and fish and smoke, the sound of water and rope and breathing, all of it merges into a state of being that is peaceful and complete, and you drift in it, not sleeping but not fully awake. A passenger on a voyage that exists outside of time. The knarr continues on her course. The grey sky arches overhead, and the sea stretches in all directions, and you are held in the calm, sensory world of the ship, a world that asks nothing but to be experienced, one slow, quiet moment after another. The light fades entirely into a thick, starless dark, the grey of the day surrendering by slow degrees until there is no distinction between the sea and the sky, only a uniform blackness that presses against your eyes with a gentle, velvety weight. Above you the sky is an unbroken cover of clouds, so dense that no point of light can pierce through, not the faintest glimmer of a moon or the distant spark of a single star, and the world is reduced to the ship and the immediate sea around it, a small circle of reality that moves with you through the void. You stand at the tiller, your hand resting on the smooth wood that has become as familiar as your own skin, and you steer by the feel of the wind on your cheek and the pressure of the swells against the rudder, a guidance that comes from long practice and a deep familiarity with the ship, because there is nothing to see, no horizon, no landmark, no point of reference except the invisible forces that act upon the hull. The darkness has a quality that is almost physical, a soft heaviness that wraps around you like a second cloak and muffles the world beyond the gunwales. It is not a frightening darkness, but a comforting one, an absence of stimulation that allows your other senses to come forward and take their place in your awareness. The sound of the water sliding past the hull seems louder now, or perhaps you are simply paying more attention to it, the soft, continuous hiss that has been there all along now, filling the space that your eyes would normally occupy. It is a sound without variation, a steady white noise that could have been playing since the beginning of the world and will continue until the end, and you let it wash through your mind, carrying away the small thoughts and worries that might otherwise gather in the quiet. The water is black, smooth except for the low rolling swells that lift the knarr gently from behind, and then let it settle with a soft sigh, a motion that is so regular and predictable that your body anticipates each lift before it comes. The bow rises, pauses for a moment at the top, and then descends with a quiet swooping motion, and the whole ship seems to breathe with the sea, a single organism that knows the rhythm by heart. The wake behind you is invisible, a trail of smooth water that disappears into the darkness, and the bow foam is the only white in all the black, a faint phosphorescent glow that appears and fades with each surge, a ghost light that marks the ship's passage through the night. You can barely see the prow from where you stand, only the faintest suggestion of the curving stem against the dark, a shape that is more a feeling than a sight, and the figurehead, that worn spiral carving, is entirely lost in the blackness, known only to your memory. The skipper is somewhere forward, a dark shape among other dark shapes, and you cannot see him, but you know he is there by the occasional soft sound of his boots on the deck and the faint rustle of his cloak when he shifts his weight. The other crewmen are resting under their sheepskins, invisible except as low mounds that rise and fall with the ship's motion, and their breathing is a quiet chorus of slow, regular sounds that blend with the hiss of the water and the creak of the rigging. One of them murmurs something in his sleep, a single word that is lost before it can be understood, and then he falls silent again, his breathing resuming its steady rhythm. The young sailor with the shadow of a beard is at the lookout, standing near the bow with one hand on the stem, and you can see his silhouette against the slightly lighter black of the sky, a human shape that is as still as a carving, his head turning slowly from side to side as he scans the darkness for anything that might be there, though nothing ever is. The sail above you is a vast, dark wing that blocks out a portion of the sky, its striped fabric invisible now, its presence known only by the sound it makes when the wind breathes through it and the gentle pull it exerts on the mast and the sheets. The wool rustles softly, a sound like the wings of a large bird settling on a nest, and the yard creaks in its fittings, a low wooden note that comes at the same point in each roll, as predictable as a heartbeat. The rigging hangs in the darkness, its lines disappearing upward into the black, and you can feel the tension of the sheets through the deck, a taut, living force that connects the wind to the hull and drives the ship forward through the unseen water. The helmsman steers by the feel of the wind on his face, a cool, steady pressure against his left cheek that tells him the ship is holding its course, and by the rhythmic pressure of the sea on the rudder, a conversation between the wood and the water that is transmitted directly to his hand through the tiller. You have learned to read these signals during the long watches of the crossing, and you now understand that the wind has a texture and a weight, that it speaks in a language of pressure and release, and that the sea answers with its own language of lift and fall and sideways tug. The tiller in your hand is not a tool but a translator, a device that turns the forces of nature into sensations that your body can understand, and you respond to those sensations without thinking, your wrist making small automatic adjustments that keep the ship on its invisible path. The darkness seems to stretch on forever, a condition that has no beginning and no end, and you lose any sense of time passing because there are no markers, no changes in the light, no stars that wheel overhead to show the turning of the night. The watch could have lasted an hour or a lifetime, and you would not know the difference because every moment is the same as the one before it and the one after, a continuous, seamless present that asks nothing of you but to remain still and attentive. You might hear the distant low breathing of a whale, a single exhale far off in the blackness, a deep, resonant sound that rolls across the water like a note from a great horn, and then fades into silence, leaving you wondering if you imagined it. The whale does not call again, and the sea returns to its quiet, steady rhythm, the hiss of the bow wave and the creak of the mast the only sounds. You think about the whale as it swims somewhere below you, a massive, gentle creature that moves through the deep water with the same slow grace as the ship, and you imagine its dark shape gliding under the keel, its eye, the size of a small shield, looking up at the hull for a moment before it continues on its way. The thought is a pleasant one, a connection to the living world that exists beneath the surface, and it drifts through your mind like a leaf on a stream, there for a moment and then gone, replaced by the simple awareness of the tiller in your hand and the cool air on your face. The sea is full of such creatures, you know, the cod and the herring and the great whales, the seals that sometimes surface with their round, wet heads, the seabirds that will appear when land is near. But tonight there is only the one distant breath, and then silence, the animals choosing to remain hidden in the dark. Your own breathing has slowed to match the rhythm of the ship, a deep, calm cycle that begins when the stern lifts and ends when it settles, and you are aware of the air moving in and out of your lungs with a gentle, effortless flow. The cold has crept into your fingers and the tip of your nose, a mild, numbing chill that is not uncomfortable but simply present, and you tuck your free hand into the sleeve of your cloak to warm it, feeling the wool soft against your skin. The cloak smells of salt and lanolin, and the faint, distant memory of smoke, and you pull it tighter around your shoulders, the weight of it a comfort in the darkness. Your feet in their leather boots are warm enough, and you shift your weight slightly from one leg to the other, a small movement that keeps the blood flowing and the stiffness at bay. The silence between the small sounds is deep and complete, a void that seems to absorb all noise, and yet the darkness is not silent at all when you truly listen. There is the hiss of the water, of course, and the creak of the mast and the soft breathing of the men. But there are other sounds too, so faint that they are almost below the threshold of hearing. The tiny lapping of wavelets against the rudder, the distant whisper of the wind across the open sea, the subtle shift of the cargo under its leather cover as the ship rolls. These sounds are all part of the night's quiet music, and you let them wash over you, not trying to identify them or separate them, simply receiving them as they come, a gentle, constant stream of sensation that fills the darkness without disturbing its peace. The young sailor at the bow shifts his weight, and you hear the soft scuff of his boot on the deck, a small human sound that is somehow reassuring, a reminder that you are not alone in the blackness, that there are other people sharing this long, slow passage through the night. He turns his head toward you, though you cannot see his face, and you sense, rather than see the nod he gives you, a silent acknowledgement that all is well, that the watch continues as it should. You nod back, though he probably cannot see you either, and the two of you share the darkness in a companionship that needs no words, a bond forged by the simple act of being awake together while the world sleeps. The clouds overhead remain unbroken, their thickness a constant presence that you can feel even though you cannot see them, a low ceiling that presses down with a gentle weight and holds the heat of the day close to the water. The everyday heroes, that not bitter, and there is no wind chill because the breeze is steady and moderate, just enough to fill the sail and keep the ship moving at its slow walking pace. You are grateful for this because a storm would be a different thing entirely, a loud, violent interruption of the peace. But there is no storm tonight, no drama, no action, only the calm, the darkness, the soft sounds of the ship and the sea, repeating over and over like a lullaby that has been sung since the first sailor pushed off from the first shore. You close your eyes for a moment, not because you are tired, but because the darkness is the same whether your eyes are open or closed, and you let your other senses take over completely, the feel of the tiller, the sound of the water, the smell of the salt and the tar. The ship moves under you with that eternal rocking motion, and you feel yourself drifting into a state that is halfway between waking and sleep, a place where thoughts become images and images become dreams, though you are still standing, still holding the tiller, still guiding the ship through the night. You might think of a fire burning in a hearth, the flames dancing and the smoke rising, or you might think of a field of grass waving in the wind, or you might think of nothing at all, your mind as empty and dark as the sky above. A hand touches your shoulder, light and brief, and you open your eyes to find the skipper standing beside you, a dark shape against the dark sky, his face invisible, but his presence unmistakable. He says nothing, but you understand that the watch is turning over, and you step aside, surrendering the tiller to his waiting hands. The exchange is made in complete silence, the wood passing from your grip to his, and you feel a brief moment of dislocation as the connection to the ship is broken, a floating sensation that lasts only a heartbeat before you adjust to being a passenger again. You walk forward carefully, your feet finding the familiar deck without stumbling, and you locate an empty sheepskin near the mast, where you lie down and pull the fleece over you, feeling the warmth of it seep into your chilled body. You lie on your back and look up at the sail, a vast, dark shape that blocks out the clouds, and you listen to the sounds of the ship as you drift towards sleep, the hiss of the water, the creak of the mast, the breathing of the men around you. The skipper is a steady presence at the tiller, and you know that the ship is in good hands, that she will continue on her course through the night without any need for your attention. You close your eyes and let the rhythm take you, the lift and fall, the hush and sigh, and you slip into a sleep that is as deep and dark as the water beneath the keel, a sleep without dreams, without disturbance, only the slow, gentle rocking of the knarr as she crosses the North Sea under the cloudy, starless sky. The watches turn over again and again, their passing marked only by the slow count of wooden tally sticks that the skipper keeps in a small leather pouch at his belt, each stick a finger's length of pale birch wood with notches carved along its edge. You have seen him take the pouch out during the quiet moments between one thing and another, loosening the drawstring with a pull of his thumb and forefinger, and he sorts through the sticks with the same unhurried attention he gives to every task, his lips moving slightly as he counts the notches by touch. One stick represents the daylight watches, another the night, and there are others for the longer spans of the voyage, though you have never asked how many notches remain, because the number does not matter, and the question would break the comfortable silence that wraps around the ship like the grey clouds overhead. The tally sticks are a quiet record of time passing, a way of holding on to something that otherwise would dissolve into the seamless flow of the sea and the sky, and they click softly against each other when the skipper puts them away, a tiny wooden sound that is gone almost before you can hear it. There is no land anywhere, not even the faintest smudge on the horizon that might resolve into a distant shore, and there has been no land for so long that the memory of it has become abstract, a concept rather than a reality. The rocky harbour, the sod-roofed longhouse, the woman with the bucket, the child in the doorway, all of these exist now only in your mind, and they have taken on the quality of a story told by someone else, a tale of a place that might be real or might be a dream. You do not miss the land, because there is nothing on the ship that requires it, and the grey water that stretches in every direction provides everything you need, a surface to sail on, a rhythm to breathe by, a horizon to gaze at without seeing. The absence of birds is complete, not a single gull or tern, or the small fork-tailed ones that sometimes follow ships, and their absence is so total that you stop expecting them, accepting the empty sky as the natural condition of this part of the sea. No floating weed drifts past the hull, no branch or leaf or bit of driftwood carried out from some distant river mouth, nothing at all to break the uniform surface of the water except the gentle swells that roll toward you from the northwest and pass under the keel with that eternal sighing lift and fall. The sea is a plain of grey silk, its texture varying only in the subtlest ways, a patch of darker ripples here, a smoothed area there where the wind has pressed the surface flat, and the bow wave that curls away from the stem in a constant, frothing whisper. You have become so accustomed to this emptiness that you would notice a single floating feather with the shock of a miracle. But no feather comes, and the emptiness continues, soothing and absolute. You notice small things during the long hours at the tiller, things that would have been invisible in the busy world of the settlement, but that here, in the stillness of the open sea, become the whole of your attention. A single drop of water clings to the gunwale near your right hand, its surface a perfect trembling sphere that catches the grey light and bends it into a tiny bright spark, and you watch it for a long time without any sense of urgency, seeing how it shivers with each roll of the ship but does not fall, held by some invisible bond between the water and the wood. The drop seems to be waiting for something, some particular angle of tilt or gust of wind that will release it, and you find yourself waiting with it, not actively but passively, your mind as still as the drop itself. Eventually, after many rolls and many breaths, the ship leans just a little further and the drop slides down the gunwale in a slow, deliberate line, leaving a dark trail on the wood before it drips onto the deck and is absorbed into the planks, gone without a sound. You blink and return your gaze to the horizon, the moment complete. A coil of rope near the mast shifts slightly with each roll, the loops rubbing against each other with a faint rasping sound, and the whole coil moves perhaps the width of a finger during the course of a watch, inching its way across the deck in a journey that is too slow to see, but that accumulates over time. You notice the position of the coil relative to a particular knot in the deck plank, and you see that by the end of your watch it has moved enough that the knot is now partly visible, a small dark eye that was hidden before. The rope is a living thing in its own quiet way, responding to the motion of the ship, and no one will move it back, because there is no need, because on the knarr everything is allowed to find its own place, to settle where it will. The clouds maintain their unbroken cover, but they are not entirely uniform, and over the course of many watches you have learned to see the subtle variations in their shade, the way the grey deepens and lightens in slow, rhythmic cycles that might correspond to the hidden sun or might simply be the clouds breathing. One patch of cloud directly overhead is a shade of grey that is almost silver, a paleness that suggests the sun is somewhere behind it, struggling to break through but not succeeding, and you watch this patch as it drifts slowly across the sky, its shape changing by imperceptible degrees, its edges blurring and reforming. The clouds move in a stately, silent procession that is the only visible evidence of the wind above, and you follow their progress with a lazy, unfocused gaze, not thinking about them, but simply letting them be there. The wind does not change its strength or direction, holding steady from the northwest with a faithfulness that feels almost personal, as if the wind itself has decided to carry you across the sea and will not rest until the journey is done. You keep the tiller in the same position, your hand resting on the smooth wood, and the ship holds its course as if on an invisible track, the bow pointed toward a destination that exists only in the skipper's knowledge and the tally stick's slow count. The pressure of the wind on your left cheek remains constant, a cool, steady touch that you have grown so used to that you would feel its absence as a kind of loss, a missing piece of the world. The sail above you stays full and taut, the striped wool holding its curved shape without any need for adjustment, and the sheets creak in their blocks with that same low wooden note that has been the background music of the entire voyage. The sea's surface is broken by nothing more than the occasional patch of darker ripples where a light puff of air touches the water for a moment, a small, fleeting disturbance that appears and disappears without any pattern, like the thoughts that drift through your mind during the quiet hours. You watch these ripples as they come, their edges sharp and then softening, their darkness spreading and then fading, and they are a kind of entertainment, a small show that the sea puts on for you alone. The ripples never last long. They move across the surface for a few ship lengths and then vanish, leaving the water as smooth as it was before, and the ship sails through them without any change in its motion, indifferent to their brief existence. You might stretch your legs by taking a slow walk from the tiller to the mast, a journey that takes perhaps 20 steps, each one placed carefully on the familiar deck, your boots making soft, solid sounds on the wood. The walk is not hurried, there is no destination except the return, and you pause at the mast to rest your hand on the tarred surface, feeling the slight vibration of the wind and the sea transmitted through the great, round timber. The mast is warm where the friction of the rigging has heated it, and cold on the side that faces the wind, and you stand there for a while, your eyes moving over the familiar details of the cargo cover, the resting men, the coiled ropes, and the small lantern that burns with its steady flame. The grey-haired man is sitting on his sea chest, mending a strap with a bone needle, and he looks up as you pass, his eyes calm and unreadable, and you exchange a nod that contains everything that needs to be said. Then you walk back to the stern, your steps retracing the same path in reverse, and you resume your place at the tiller, settling onto the sea chest with a quiet sigh, your hand finding the warm grip as if it had been waiting for you. The stretch has done its work, loosening the stiffness in your legs and refreshing your attention, and you return to the steady task of steering with a renewed sense of calm. The ship has not deviated from its course during your short absence. The wind and the sea have held it steady, and you make no adjustments, simply continuing where you left off. The voyage is a steady, continuous forward movement that feels almost stationary, because there is no reference point by which to measure progress, no tree or rock or headland that moves against the sky, only the endless, repeating swells that lift the ship and let it fall in a cycle without end. You have the sensation sometimes, especially during the deep watches of the night, that the knarr is not moving at all, but is suspended in a grey, timeless room while the sea moves past it, a river of water flowing under the keel while the ship remains still. This illusion is a pleasant one, and you let it wash over you without examining it, because the truth does not matter, and the illusion is restful, a way of passing the hours without effort. The light, such as it is, changes by degrees so small that you cannot point to the moment when morning becomes afternoon or afternoon becomes evening. The grey simply deepens and then lightens again in a slow tidal rhythm that has no sharp transitions. You have learned to read the quality of the light, to guess at the time, though guessing is all it ever is, because the clouds hide the sun's position so completely that you might be off by hours and never know. This uncertainty is not troubling. It is liberating. A release from the tyranny of the clock that has no meaning here on the open water, where time is measured only by the watches and the tally sticks and the slow counting of your own heartbeats. You feel a quiet contentment settling over you, a peace that comes from the simplicity of the task and the constancy of the surroundings, and you think that you could continue like this for many more days without any need for change or variety. The ship provides everything: shelter, purpose, companionship, and a rhythm that soothes the mind into a state of calm attention that is neither sleep nor waking, but something in between. A floating awareness that drifts from one small observation to the next without any urgency. You notice the way the grey-haired man's hands move as he sews, the needle dipping in and out of the leather with a steady, precise motion. And you notice the way the young sailor's head nods forward when he dozes, then jerks back up as he catches himself, only to nod again a moment later. These small human details are the landmarks of the ship's small world, and you chart them with the same care that a navigator charts the stars. The skipper takes out his tally sticks again, counting the notches with his thumb, and then he looks at the sky, though there is nothing to see there except the grey clouds, and he puts the sticks away and walks aft to stand beside you. He does not speak for a long time, just stands with his arms folded, watching the water with his calm, steady gaze, and then he says a few words about the course, that you are holding it well, that the sea is behaving, that the wind should hold for another day or two. His voice is low and unhurried, each word separated by a breath, and you listen without needing to respond, because his words are not instructions or questions, but simply observations, spoken aloud as a way of sharing the quiet. You nod once, and he nods back, and then he walks forward again, his boots making their soft, familiar sound on the deck. The day, if it is still day, wears on in this manner, the watch is turning, the sea lifting and falling, the clouds drifting overhead in their slow, silent procession. You lose count of the number of times you have sat at the tiller, surrendered it to another, rested under the sheepskins, and returned again, because the cycle has become so smooth and continuous that it feels like a single, extended moment rather than a series of separate events. The grey light deepens and then lightens, the lantern is lit and then extinguished. The men eat their dried fish and hard bread, and the ship sails on, a steady, constant presence in a world that has no edges and no end. And you, at the tiller or resting or walking the short path from stern to mast and back, are simply part of it. A small, quiet piece of a voyage that will continue for as long as it needs to, through the measured passage of time. A change comes so softly that it is felt before it is seen, a cooling of the air by a few degrees and a new dampness on the cheek that arrives without any fanfare, almost as if the sea itself has exhaled a long, moist breath across the deck. You are at the tiller, your hand resting on the smooth wood with the ease of many watches, and you notice the shift first as a slight tightening of the skin on your face, a cool, wet touch that is barely distinguishable from the salt spray that has been a constant companion. The clouds, already thick and unbroken, seem to lower themselves just a bit, their undersides dropping closer to the masthead so that the grey ceiling presses down with a gentle, increased weight, and the horizon contracts, the circle of visibility shrinking until the ship feels more enclosed, more wrapped in soft grey wool. The wind does not change its direction, still holding from the northwest with the same steady pressure, but it carries a new texture now, a fine, suspended moisture that you can feel on your lips when you part them, a taste of fresh water mixed with the salt. The first sign that you can see, rather than feel, appears as a faint misting on the surface of the sea, a subtle blurring of the line between the water and the air. And then the drizzle begins, so fine and slow that it seems to hang in the air like breath on a cold day rather than fall. The droplets are tiny, almost microscopic, and they drift downward with a leisurely floating motion, catching the grey light and sparkling for a moment before they settle on whatever surface they find. They land on the wool sail with a soft, pattering sound that is not a patter at all, but more like a whispered hush, a quiet rustle as the moisture kisses the fabric and soaks into its dense weave. The sail darkens slightly, the muted stripes of red and brown deepening a shade, and the wool grows heavier, its surface beading with a million tiny gems that glisten without falling, each droplet clinging to the fibers until another joins it, and together they sink into the cloth. The deck, too, receives the drizzle with a soft, accepting silence, the planks darkening from grey-brown to a deeper, wetter shade that reflects the clouded sky in a dull sheen. The droplets do not run or pool but soak into the wood slowly, the dry fibers drinking the moisture after long days of salt and wind, and the deck gives off a faint, clean smell of wet timber, a scent like a forest after rain, though there is no forest for 100 miles in any direction. Your cloak absorbs the drizzle in the same quiet way, the wool growing heavier on your shoulders as the moisture works its way into the weave, and the smell of lanolin rises from the fabric, stronger now, mixed with the fresh, cool scent of the rain. The droplets settle on the hood of your cloak and on the sleeves of your tunic, and they bead up on the leather of your boots, tiny spears of water that tremble with each roll of the ship but do not fall, held by the oil in the leather. The crew adjusts to the change without any words, because the drizzle requires no discussion and no command, only a few simple, calm movements that are made with the same unhurried grace as every other action on the knarr. One man, the grey-haired sailor who was mending the net, tugs the edge of the leather cover over the cargo a little tighter, pulling the ties snug with a quick, efficient motion, and then he nods to himself, satisfied that the dried cod in the barrels will stay dry. Another man, the young sailor with a shadow of a beard, reaches for a leather hood that hangs from his belt and pulls it over his head, the stiff material shaping itself to his skull with a soft creaking sound, and he adjusts the edge so that it shields his face without blocking his view. The skipper, standing near the mast, looks up at the sail and then at the sheets, and he makes a small adjustment to the tension, tugging the line through its block by the width of a hand, and then making it fast again, the sail responding with a slight, satisfied shiver before settling into its new shape. No one speaks. The only sounds are the creak of the rigging, the hiss of the drizzle on the water, and the soft movements of the crew as they settle into the new conditions. The sound of the drizzle on the sea is a soft, steady hiss, a white noise that wraps around the ship and deepens the feeling of enclosure, muffling even the familiar sounds of the hull and the mast into something softer, more distant. The hiss is continuous and uniform, without any variation in pitch or volume, and it fills your ears until it becomes the dominant note in the ship's quiet music, the other sounds fading into the background like instruments in an orchestra that have been told to play more softly. The creak of the mast is still there, but it seems to come from further away, as if the moisture in the air has wrapped a blanket around it and absorbed some of the vibration, and the gentle slap of the waves against the rudder is now a muffled liquid pat that is barely audible over the rain's whisper. The sound of your own breathing is louder in the quiet, a slow, steady rhythm that matches the rise and fall of the swells, and you can hear the soft, wet rustle of your cloak whenever you move, a sound like the turning of a page in a very old book. The sea remains calm under the drizzle, the swells long and gentle, their surfaces smoothed by the falling moisture until the distinction between the water and the air becomes blurred, the raindrops meeting the sea with tiny, invisible kisses that leave no mark. The knarr continues its steady progress, the sail still full and drawing, and the ship leans into the wind with the same constant angle, the hull cutting through the grey water with a soft, continuous hiss that merges with the hiss of the rain until you cannot tell them apart. The bow wave is still there, a curl of white foam at the stem, but it seems smaller now, muted by the rain, and the weight behind you is a gentle, smooth trail that disappears into the grey curtain of the drizzle within a few ship lengths, the world beyond reduced to a soft, grey blur. You watch the moisture bead on the wooden tiller, the droplets forming along the grain of the wood, and then combining into larger drops that slide slowly down the shaft and drip onto the deck with a tiny, irregular plink, each drop a small, bright note in the quiet. The tiller feels cool and damp under your hand, the wood slightly swollen with the moisture, and your grip makes a faint, wet sound when you adjust your fingers, a soft, squelching noise that is over as soon as it begins. The coolness seeps through the shoulders of your woolen tunic, where the rain has soaked into the fabric, and it spreads downward in a slow, comfortable weight that is not unpleasant but simply present, a reminder of the weather and the sea. The tunic grows heavier as the drizzle continues, the wool darkening to a deeper brown, and you feel the dampness reaching your skin, a cool, gradual penetration that is not cold, but merely a new sensation to add to the many sensations of the voyage. The air smells different now, washed clean of the salt and the tar by the fresh water, and the dominant scent is a cool, earthy smell that seems to come from the rain itself, a smell of wet rock and damp soil, and the memory of streams running over mossy stones. Under that is the scent of the wet wool, the lanolin stronger than ever, and the faint, clean smell of the wet deck, the timber releasing its stored essence into the moist air. The tar on the rigging gives off a sharper, more pungent scent in the dampness, the water activating the pitch in some chemical way that releases a cloud of resinous fragrance, and it mixes with the other smells to create a new perfume, the smell of a ship in the rain, a smell that is ancient and comforting and full of quiet life. The drizzle persists, continuing through the watch without any sign of stopping or intensifying, maintaining its fine, misty character with a patience that matches the patience of the sea itself. You shift your weight on the sea chest, feeling the dampness of the wood under your thighs, and you pull your hood a little further forward to shield your face, though the rain is so fine that it does not really need shielding, the droplets more like a cool mist than a wetting rain. The inside of the hood is dark and warm, and your breath collects there. A faint, humid pocket that smells of you and the wool and the salt of the sea, and you feel sheltered, protected, even as the drizzle continues to fall on your shoulders and back. The young sailor with the leather hood is sitting on his sea chest now, his head bowed so that the rain runs off the brim of the hood in a slow, steady drip that falls onto the deck between his boots, each drop a tiny, silent punctuation in the quiet. He is carving something with his small knife, a piece of driftwood or a scrap of bone, and the blade makes a soft, scraping sound that is the only irregular noise in the steady hiss of the rain, a sound that comes and goes as he works, pausing to examine his progress, and then resuming with the same calm, absorbed attention. The grey-haired man has taken out his bone needle again and is mending another piece of gear, a torn strap or a ripped seam, his hands moving with the same slow, steady rhythm, the needle dipping in and out of the leather with a soft, wet sound now that the leather has absorbed some of the moisture. The skipper stands at the bow, a dark shape in the grey mist, his cloak pulled tight around him and his hood up, and he is looking out at the sea with that same calm, patient expression, his gaze fixed on the invisible horizon as if he can see something there that no one else can, that there is nothing to see but the grey rain and the grey water and the grey sky, all blended together into a single, soft, quiet world. He does not move for a long time, just stands with his hand on the stem, and then he turns and walks back along the deck, his boots making a soft, wet sound on the planks, and he pauses near you to check the tiller, his hand resting on the wood beside yours for a moment, the two hands sharing the same cool, damp surface. He nods once, a small, almost invisible gesture, and then he continues on his way, his figure disappearing into the mist that has gathered around the mast. The drizzle deepens the feeling of enclosure that has been with you since the voyage began, the grey curtain drawing closer around the ship until the world is reduced to the deck and the immediate sea, the rest of existence fading into a soft, featureless blur. You feel a kind of peace in this enclosure, a sense of being held, protected by the rain and the clouds from anything that might disturb the quiet, and you let yourself sink into it, your mind becoming as still and smooth as the surface of the sea under the falling moisture. The hiss of the rain is a lullaby, a continuous soft sound that fills your ears and empties your thoughts, and you find yourself breathing in time with it, a slow, deep rhythm that is as old as the first rain that ever fell on the first sea. Time passes without any measure, the drizzle blurring the distinction between one watch and the next, and you lose track of how long you have been at the tiller, how long the rain has been falling, how long it has been since you last thought of anything beyond the ship and the sea and the soft grey world. The light, already dim, fades a little further as the clouds thicken overhead and the grey deepens into a darker shade that hints at the approach of evening, though there is no way to be certain, no sun to mark the hour. The lantern near the mast glows with its warm amber light, the flame steady behind its horn shield, and the light catches the falling droplets, turning them into a halo of tiny golden sparks that dance around the lantern and then disappear into the dark. The smell of the burning oil mixes with the smell of the rain, a warm, pungent note in the cool, fresh air, and it draws your eye, a small, steady beacon in the grey. The drizzle persists for the length of a whole watch, and then, as gradually as it began, it begins to ease, the droplets becoming fewer and finer, the hiss on the water softening to a whisper, and then to a silence that is broken only by the occasional isolated drop that falls from the rigging or the edge of the sail with a tiny, liquid plink. The clouds remain low and thick, but they lift just a little, the grey ceiling rising back to its usual height, and the world expands again, the horizon reappearing as a faint pale line that separates the sea from the sky. The sail lightens as it begins to dry, the dark wet patches fading to a lighter grey, and the deck steams gently as the moisture evaporates into the cool air. A faint, misty vapour that rises in slow, curling wisps and then disappears. Your cloak is still damp, but it is drying too, and you feel the weight lessening on your shoulders, the wool beginning to warm again with your body's heat. The crew stirs, adjusting to the end of the rain with the same quiet, wordless efficiency, the young sailor pushing back his leather hood and shaking the water from it with a single, sharp motion, the drops flying out and catching the light for a moment before falling to the deck. The grey-haired man puts away his needle and stretches his arms over his head, a soft groan escaping his lips, and then he settles back against the gunwale, his eyes closing in a brief rest. The skipper walks aft to the tiller and takes it from you with a light touch, and you surrender it willingly, standing up and stretching your legs, the stiffness from the long watch melting away as you move. You walk forward to the bow and stand there for a while, looking out at the sea that is unchanged, the swells still rolling towards you with their eternal gentle rhythm, and you feel the cool, clean air on your face, washed fresh by the rain. The ship continues, the drizzle only a memory now, a quiet interlude in the long, slow crossing, and you return to your resting place, pulling the sheepskin over you and closing your eyes, the last drops of moisture tapping softly against the hull, like a gentle, fading heartbeat. In the deepest part of the night, when the darkness has settled into a weight so complete that it feels like a substance rather than an absence, the wind slackens by degrees so small that you do not notice the change until the sail begins to lose its taut curve, the striped wool softening and shivering with a gentle rippling motion that makes a sound like a distant whisper. You are at the tiller, your hand resting on the smooth wood that has become an extension of your own body through the many watches of the crossing, and you feel the rudder grow lighter, the pressure against your palm fading, until the steering oar requires only the barest touch to hold its position, a fingertip's weight rather than a hand's grip. The ship loses its slight lean, the hull settling upright with a slow, almost imperceptible roll, and the forward speed drops until the bow wave is just a whisper, and the wake is barely a line of smooth water trailing behind the stern, a faint silver thread that disappears into the blackness after only a few ship lengths. The sail hangs with only a faint breath of pressure, the wool fabric stirring and sagging between the yard and the sheets, and the creak of the rigging fades to a near silence, the lines slack and quiet in their blocks, the mast describing a smaller, slower circle against the unseen sky. The sounds that have been the constant companions of the voyage, the hiss of the water along the hull, the groan of the wooden frame, the tap of the loose line, all of them soften and retreat, leaving a quiet so deep that you can hear the blood moving in your ears, a faint, rhythmic pulse that is the baseline of your own existence. The ship does not stop moving forward, because the sea's momentum and the last remnant of the breeze carry her on, but the progress is so slow that it feels like drifting, a gentle, aimless glide through a world that has forgotten the meaning of speed. You adjust your grip on the tiller, shifting your hand by the width of a finger, and the rudder responds with a lazy, delayed movement, the water flowing past it with a soft, liquid sound that is more like a caress than a current. The sea around you is calm, the swells still rolling in from the northwest, but gentler now, their tops smooth and rounded, their passage under the keel, a slow sighing lift that raises the stern and then lets it down with a soft cradling motion, a mother rocking a child in the dark. The water is black, an opaque, velvety black that reflects no light because there is no light to reflect. The clouds overhead still thick and unbroken, hiding the moon and the stars with a dense, soft blanket that presses down on the world with a gentle, muffling weight. You cannot see the horizon, cannot see where the sea ends and the sky begins, and the ship seems to float in a void, a small wooden universe that contains everything that exists. The darkness is absolute, the kind of darkness that is not simply the absence of light, but a presence in itself, a thick, soft presence that wraps around you like a heavy cloak and fills your eyes with a uniform, velvety black that does not change whether your eyes are open or closed. You find yourself closing your eyes for long stretches, not because you are tired, but because there is no reason to keep them open, and the darkness behind your eyelids is the same as the darkness in front of them. A seamless, unbroken black that offers no distinction and no distraction. Your other senses come forward to fill the void, the feel of the tiller under your hand, the smell of the salt and the tar and the damp wool, the sound of the water lapping against the hull with a soft, irregular rhythm, and these sensations become your whole world, a world that is small and quiet and perfectly complete. The sea seems to sleep, its surface smooth except for the long, gentle swells that pass under the keel with a slowness that feels almost geological, each one taking a long, measured breath to lift the ship and then release it, the motion so subtle that you might imagine it if you were not paying attention. The water makes a small, lapping sound as the hull rocks gently from side to side, a sound like a tongue touching the roof of a mouth, soft and wet and infinitely patient, and it speaks to itself in a language that has no words, a liquid murmur that has been going on since the ocean was formed and will continue until it vanishes. You listen to this sound with a kind of reverence, because it is the voice of the sea at rest, a voice that is rarely heard in the busy world of harbours and storms, and it fills you with a peace that is deeper than any sleep. Time stretches into a long, slow drift, the watches losing their meaning as the ship moves so little that the tally sticks in the skipper's pouch might as well be counting the beats of your heart rather than the hours of the voyage. You could count 100 of your own heartbeats and feel no change in the ship's attitude, no shift in the wind, no variation in the darkness, and the counting itself would become a kind of meditation, a slow, rhythmic exercise that fills the quiet without disturbing it. Your heartbeat is a steady, regular thump that you can feel in your chest and in your fingertips where they rest on the tiller, a gentle, persistent reminder that you are alive and present in this moment, and you match your breathing to it. 4 beats in, 4 beats out, a slow, calming cycle that has no beginning and no end. The resting men are so still that you might forget they are there, their shapes invisible in the darkness, their breathing so quiet and regular that it blends with the lapping of the water and the faint creak of the hull, becoming just another thread in the fabric of the night. One of them shifts in his sleep, a soft rustle of wool against sheepskin, and then is still again, the silence returning like a tide that covers everything. The skipper is forward somewhere, a dark presence that you sense rather than see, and he is as still as the rest, trusting the ship to hold herself steady in the calm, because a knarr knows how to drift, knows how to wait for the wind to return, and there is no hurry, no destination that must be reached by a certain hour, only the long, slow passage of the night. You are aware of your own breathing, slow and deep, and you let it become the focus of your attention, the rise and fall of your chest matching the rise and fall of the sea, a quiet, synchronized dance that has been going on since you first stepped aboard the ship in the harbour that now seems like a distant memory. Your breath comes in through your nose and goes out through your mouth, a soft, warm flow that you can feel on your lips, and each exhale carries a tiny amount of tension with it, leaving your body more relaxed, more at peace, until you feel as if you are dissolving into the darkness, becoming part of the ship and the sea and the sky, a single, quiet entity that has no boundaries and no name. The tiller rests in your hand with a weight that is barely there, the wood cool and smooth and familiar, and you make no adjustments because there is nothing to adjust, the ship drifting on a course that is set by the deep currents rather than the wind, a course that is slow and aimless and utterly peaceful. You could let go of the tiller entirely, and the ship would continue on her way without any help from you, but you keep your hand there because the contact is comforting, a connection to the vessel that carries you, a reminder that you are the helmsman, even in the calm, even in the dark, even when there is nothing to steer. The darkness begins to take on a quality that is almost dreamlike, the line between waking and sleeping blurring until you are not sure which side of it you are on, and you let yourself drift in that in-between space, a place where thoughts come and go like small waves, gentle and without force. You might think of the whale that you heard many watches ago, its deep resonant breath echoing across the water, and you wonder where it is now, if it is sleeping too, suspended in the deep water with its great eye closed, its massive body held by the same currents that hold the ship. The thought is a pleasant one, and it lingers for a while, a soft, warm presence in your mind, and then it fades, replaced by a memory of the settlement, the long house with its sod roof, the smell of the peat smoke, the sound of the woman's footsteps on the muddy path, all of it distant and gentle, a story from another life. You might think of nothing at all, your mind becoming as empty and still as the sea, a smooth, dark surface that reflects no light and holds no image. And this emptiness is not a lack but a fullness, a peace that fills you from the inside out, a quiet that is so complete that it becomes a presence in itself. The sounds of the ship, the lapping of the water, the creak of the hull, the breathing of the men, all of them merge into a single, continuous hum that is the sound of the night itself, and you rest in that hum like a hand resting on a warm stone, perfectly still, perfectly content. A long time passes, though you could not say how long, and the darkness holds its absolute dominion over the world, the clouds unbroken, the wind absent, the sea sleeping. You shift your weight slightly on the sea chest, a small, slow movement that does not disturb the stillness, and you feel the stiffness in your legs, the pleasant ache of muscles that have been still too long, and you know that soon the watch will turn over and you will find your rest among the sheepskins. But for now, you remain at the tiller, because the night is not over and the ship is still drifting, and there is nowhere else you would rather be. The quiet is a gift, a rare and precious thing, and you accept it with a gratitude that needs no words, holding the tiller with a light, easy grip, breathing the cool, salt air and waiting for nothing at all, because there is nothing to wait for, only the slow, gentle passage of the deepest part of the night. The skipper stirs at last, a soft sound of boots on the deck, and he appears beside you like a ghost, his shape barely visible against the black, his hand finding your shoulder with a light, brief touch. You rise without speaking, surrendering the tiller to his waiting hand, and you feel the brief floating sensation of disconnection as you let go, the ship moving under you with that same slow drifting motion, unchanged, eternal. You walk forward through the darkness, your feet finding the familiar deck without stumbling, and you locate your resting place among the sheepskins, the fleece warm and soft under your touch, and you lie down and pull the cover over you, feeling the last of the tension leave your body as you settle into the wool. The ship rocks gently, the water laps against the hull, and you close your eyes, letting the deep, slow drift of the night carry you into a sleep that is as calm and dark and peaceful as the sea itself. After many unmeasured watches, a subtle change begins in the east, so gradual and quiet that it is not a beginning at all, but a continuation, a slow shifting of the darkness into something else, something lighter and softer, that arrives without announcement. You are the tiller, the smooth wood warm under your hand after the long night, and you notice the change first as a faint easing of the blackness, a thinning of the darkness that is more a feeling than a sight, an intuition that the world is about to transform in some small, gentle way. The black of the sky fades by almost invisible degrees into a charcoal grey, a shade that holds no colour yet but has lost the absolute opacity of the deepest night, and the clouds, still unbroken overhead, begin to reveal their own texture, vast rolling layers of soft shadow that stretch from horizon to horizon like the folds of a great grey blanket that has been spread over the world to keep it warm. The charcoal grey deepens into a grey that holds a hint of pearl, a luminous quality that is not yet light but is no longer darkness, a soft, diffuse glow that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, as if the clouds themselves have begun to emit a faint, internal radiance. You watch this transformation with the same calm attention you have given to every other moment of the voyage, your eyes fixed on the eastern horizon that is slowly distinguishing itself from the sky, a pale seam where the sea meets the clouds, a line that was invisible in the dark but is now a faint silver thread that separates the two realms. The clouds are still thick and unbroken, their undersides a smooth, rolling landscape of grey hills and valleys that move in a stately, silent procession, and they lighten by degrees so small that you cannot point to the moment when the change occurs, only that it has occurred, that the world is no longer black but a deep, soft grey that holds the promise of morning. The sea responds to the changing light with a quiet, gradual awakening, its surface turning from black to a deep slate, a colour that is almost blue but not quite, a dark liquid mirror that reflects the clouds in soft, broken fragments. You can now see the gentle swell lines stretching to the horizon, long rolling ridges of water that move toward the ship from the northwest and pass under the keel with that eternal sighing rhythm, their tops smooth and rounded, their troughs deep and dark. The swell lines are marked by faint, lighter streaks, where the growing light catches the water at a certain angle, and they form a pattern that is both random and orderly, a natural geometry that your eye follows without any need to understand it, simply appreciating the beauty of the lines as they rise and fall, like the breathing of a sleeping creature that is slowly waking. The sail above you, that great square of striped wool, begins to take on color again, the muted reds and browns emerging from the grey darkness like a painting being restored. The stripes faint at first, just suggestions of warmth against the cream ground, and then more distinct as the light grows, the fabric stirring gently in the light breeze that has returned during the last watch, a soft, steady breath of air that fills the sail with a quiet, satisfied sigh. The rigging, too, becomes visible again, the dark lines of tarred hemp standing out against the sky, and you can see the individual strands of the ropes, the twists and turns of the fibers, the small frayed spots where the lines run through their blocks, all of them familiar and reassuring in the returning light. The deck around you emerges from the darkness in a slow, gentle unveiling, the planks showing their grey-brown colour and their worn, familiar grain, the cargo cover revealing its leather texture and the dark lines of its lashings, the resting men becoming shapes, with faces and hands and the slow, steady rise and fall of their breathing. The sheepskins are pale mounds against the dark wood, the fleece catching the light in a soft, creamy glow, and the men wrapped in them stir slightly as the light touches their closed eyes, their dreams shifting in response to the changing world. The young sailor with the shadow of a beard is curled on his side, his face relaxed and peaceful, and his hand rests on the deck near his cheek, the fingers slightly curled, the nails dark with the accumulated grime of the voyage. The grey-haired man lies on his back, his mouth slightly open, and his breathing is a soft, regular sound that matches the rhythm of the swells, a human echo of the sea's eternal pulse. The lantern near the mast still burns with its steady amber flame, but the light seems smaller now, less necessary, a warm golden spark that will soon be extinguished, because the day is coming and the darkness no longer needs to be held at bay. The smell of the burning oil still drifts across the deck, mixing with the salt and the tar and the damp wool. But there is a new scent on the air as well, a scent that you notice with a quiet, gradual awareness, a smell that is faintly earthy, like wet soil, and grass, like land. It comes and goes on the light breeze, appearing for a breath and then fading, replaced by the familiar salt, and then returning again, a little stronger, a little more insistent, a promise that the voyage is approaching its end. You breathe in deeply, letting the new scent fill your lungs, and you taste the land on the air, a taste of green things growing, of freshwater streams running over stones, of trees and moss and the rich dark soil that lies under the forests somewhere ahead. The taste is subtle and distant, a memory of land rather than the land itself, but it is unmistakable, and you feel a quiet stirring in your chest, not excitement, but a gentle, calm anticipation, a sense that the long crossing is drawing to a close and that the world will soon expand again to include shores and hills and the solid, unmoving earth feet. You do not hurry the feeling or examine it too closely, you simply let it be there, a new companion to join the many companions of the voyage. The skipper stirs near the bow, rising from his resting place with a slow, easy movement, and he walks aft toward you, his boots making their familiar soft sound on the deck. He does not speak at first, but stands beside you, his arms folded, his gaze fixed on the eastern horizon where the light is growing by slow degrees, the pearl grey brightening toward a shade that is almost silver, a pale, luminous glow that outlines the edge of the world. He looks forward, and you follow his gaze, and there, on the horizon, you notice a low, dark line where the sea meets a land that is still mostly shadow. A line that is barely distinguishable from the water, but that is different, a solid, unmoving presence that does not rise and fall with the swells but remains constant, a fixed point in the moving world. It is a distant shore, featureless and still far off, just a dark band between the grey sea and the grey sky. But it is there, a destination that has been waiting for you through all the watches of the crossing. The skipper nods once, a small, calm gesture that acknowledges the sight without any need for celebration, and then he turns to the crew, speaking a few quiet words that carry across the deck, telling them the land is in sight, that the voyage is nearing its end, that they should prepare for the approach. The words are simple and unhurried, spoken in the same low, calm voice he has used for every communication, and the men respond with the same quiet efficiency, rising from their sheepskins and stretching their limbs, their movements slow and deliberate after the long night. The young sailor rubs his eyes with the back of his hand and then stands up, walking to the side to look at the distant shore, his expression calm and thoughtful. The grey-haired man folds his sheepskin with careful, precise movements and stows it under a bench, and then he checks the lashings on the cargo, his hands moving over the leather cover with the ease of long practice. The sail is trimmed a fraction, the skipper adjusting the sheets with a small tug that shifts the yard by the width of a hand, and the ship responds with a slight change in its motion, the bow pointing a little more directly toward the distant line of land that is growing slowly, so slowly, on the horizon. The wind holds steady from the northwest, still cool and damp, but carrying that earthy scent more strongly now, and the knarr continues her calm approach, the hull cutting through the grey water with the same soft, continuous hiss that has been the constant companion of the voyage. The swells roll under the keel with their eternal rhythm, lifting and releasing, and the ship rides them with a grace that is as familiar as breathing. You remain at the tiller, the wood smooth and warm under your hand, and you keep the ship on her course with the same small, automatic adjustments you have made 1,000 times during the crossing, your body responding to the sea's signals without any need for conscious thought. The distant shore grows slowly larger, the dark line resolving into a landscape of low rolling hills that are covered with a muted green of grass and heather, the colours soft and washed out in the grey light, like a painting done in watercolours on a damp page. You can see the shapes of trees now, dark, stunted things that cling to the slopes, and the suggestion of a beach, a pale strip of sand or shingle at the water's edge where the waves break in a slow, gentle rhythm, a line of white foam that appears and disappears, like the heartbeat of the land itself. The air is cool and damp, but not cold, and it carries a rich, complex smell now, the salt of the sea mixing with the earth of the shore, the scent of wet rock and damp vegetation, and the faint, sweet perfume of something flowering, though you cannot see any flowers from this distance. The clouds overhead are still thick and unbroken, their colour a light, silvery grey that seems to hold the light rather than block it, and they move in their slow, stately procession toward the east, toward the land, as if they are guiding the ship home. The gulls have returned, appearing from somewhere as if summoned by the proximity of the shore, and they circle the ship with slow, lazy wings, their cries a familiar, melancholy sound that you have not heard since the harbour, a sound that speaks of rocks and cliffs and the safe, sheltered waters of the coast. The crew moves about the deck with a quiet, calm energy, preparing the ship for the final approach. The oars are made ready, the leather loops loosened and the shafts laid out along the sides, and the anchor stone is brought up from its stowage near the mast, a large flat rock with a hole bored through it and a rope tied through the hole, the rope coiled neatly beside it on the deck. The skipper stands at the bow, one hand on the stem, and he watches the shore with his calm, steady gaze, reading the shape of the land and the color of the water, looking for the signs that will tell him where the harbor lies, the safe anchorage where the cargo will be unloaded, and the voyage will end. He does not call out any commands, because there are no commands to give. Everyone knows their task and will perform it when the time comes, and until then, there is only the slow, gentle approach. The ship gliding over the grey water toward the grey shore. You feel a quiet sense of completion settling over you, a peace that comes from a journey nearly finished, a task nearly done, and you let yourself enjoy the moment. The feel of the tiller in your hand, the sight of the land growing on the horizon, the sound of the gulls and the sea and the wind, all of it merging into a single, harmonious whole, that is the end of the crossing. The world slowly brightens into another grey day, the clouds holding their soft, silvery light, and the knarr continues her steady progress, the long, slow voyage ending as peacefully as it began, a quiet drift through the cloudy, starless sky toward a shore that is no longer a dream, but a reality, solid and waiting and patient, ready to receive the ship and her crew after their long passage across the North Sea.